Okay. Good morning and welcome to the December meeting of the Delta Independent Science Board. I would like to call the meeting to order and do the roll call first. So Virginia. Declaration. It's early. Is Anna here? Yeah, Anna. Well, Tom, I have news for you. We just received a letter of resignation from Tom Holzer. So at this point, we really want to thank him for his many years of invaluable service on the board. I think it was 7 years, and we will certainly miss him. He cited personal reasons, so no other thing. Yeah. Diane isn't here yet. I was just told she will join us a little bit later online. Oh, sorry. Sorry. Tanya, is Tanya here?
I am here.
Oh, I can't
Hi.
see.
Tanya Heikela, no new declarations.
Bob?
Bob Nyman, no new declarations.
Obi? Kenny?
Kenny Rose, no new declarations.
And Lisa?
Lisa Wanger, no new declarations.
And I'm Inge Werner. I have no new declarations. So I'd like to give an overview of the agenda for today. We will discuss comments on the Delta Stewardship Council's draft tribal and environmental justice issue paper. We will finalize the Delta ISB's draft prospectus for a symposium on emerging climate research that the Delta ISB is planning in early 2025. And we will discuss the recently released draft Delta Adaptation Plan. Are there any public comments at this point?
There are none.
So agenda item 2 is my report and business matters. I attended the council's November 21st meeting, which was an opportunity to introduce myself to the council as the new chair of the ISB. Bob Nyman was scheduled to join me, but the bomb cyclone got in the way, so he could not attend either in person or online. And we will schedule his presentation on the food web report review for some other time, some other date. Instead, I briefly reported on recent reviews and on the Emerging Climate Science Symposium, which was met with enthusiasm. So I think there's a lot of positive feedback on that effort. And in place of Bob's report, I provided an update on the contaminant monitoring review. I just used the previous slides that you presented, Lisa, and added the update to it. So because we weren't sure until the day before if Bob could make it or not. So
Adaptive management.
Adaptive management for sure. Yes. So not many comments on that. Diane Burgess, who is quite interested in contaminants, she asked a few questions. In particular, whether we would include contamination introduced following wildfires. And even though we're not really at the stage where we consider all the possible contaminants that are put into the system, that was alerted me to that issue, really. I hadn't thought about that earlier, and I had said that, as of course, we would consider that all the relevant sources of contaminants to the Delta. So so that was that. Otherwise, it was quite interesting for me to hear the various topics they discussed and just meet the council members for the first time. There was also a presentation on the Delta Adaptation Plan. Next, I would like to provide a brief update on our current activities. So there's the subsidence review. The leads are still working on getting a public review draft out. The DMDU review. The review leads are working with staff to prepare a journal article on the scenario inventory and analysis. In the contaminants monitoring review, we have finished the scoping discussions and are still working on the draft prospectus to make that very clear what we intend to do and what we don't intend to do. The monitoring enterprise review manuscript, the ISB leads and staff are working to turn the Delta ISB's 2022 monitoring enterprise review into a manuscript to submit to a peer-reviewed journal. And since the last meeting, we received the following public correspondence, both from California Water Research. Received one on the social network weaving for climate adaptation, and received a briefing on the Trump administration plans to eradicate climate change references, restructure NOAA and National Marine Fisheries Service, and fire deep state, in inverted commas, civil servants. That was Lisa Desjardins. Yeah.
But the briefing was actually a reporter's article. So yeah, you can check out its attribute.
Thank you, Lisa. Are there any public comments now?
Yes, we have one from Deirdre Desjardins.
Oh,
Deirdre,
sorry.
you have the ability to unmute your microphone. Deirdre? So Deirdre, we can't hear you. There might be a microphone issue on your end. Maybe we'll get back if we can resolve that later. Oh. Tom? Yeah, maybe we'll get back to this and I'll email Deirdre to see what's going on.
Okay, thank you, Edmund. So agenda item 3 is just a debrief on the Lookout Slough tour, which we had yesterday. So yesterday, the Delta ISB toured the Lookout Slough Tidal Habitat Restoration and Flood Improvement Project, which is the largest tidal restoration project in the region. I would like to very much thank DWR again for the tour and turn it over to the board for any reflections. Would you like to share with us your impressions of yesterday? Virginia.
Well, I just want to say, I think I'm on. Oh, they're not.
That's what
It's light
happened.
green and dark green.
Yes.
I just want to also express my great appreciation. I really understand so much better when I see what is happening. And not only seeing it, but having the different experts explain what was going on and seeing the actions that have completed in October compared with those that had been completed 2 years ago was really valuable. So thank you so much to those who organized it and participated.
Yes, and we had great presentations too, and we shared a lot of enthusiasm for the project with us. It was a beautiful day too. Does anybody else would like? Oh, Obi?
No, you were first.
Tanya, I cannot see you very well, so somebody has to help me if she wants to say something. Yeah.
Yeah, I also want to thank DWR and the team, that went with us. It was quite informative, and I was very impressed with the way the project was done in a matter of 6 years or so. And the cost was not as much as I expected. There may be other costs that we didn't think about. So it was quite an impressive project, and presentations were great from both sides. I guess it's called EIP and also DWR staff. One thing I was interested, we're just starting this project, over the next 5 to 6 years, whether we are here or not, it might be good for the board to see some regular updates on the observations, because we want to know how those new channels work and see if they respond to the way that they were, designed for. So other than that, it's a great project, I think. Very impressed with the way that was done and in place.
Yeah, it would be great to see it, or at least pictures of it in a few years. Yes, yeah. Lisa? Okay.
Yeah, I want to add to that. I think it's already been captured to some extent, but I think I just really want to highlight the scale of this project. So we really do need these large restoration projects to be effective at flood control and really generating enough habitat. And it seems as though perhaps they got economies of scale by making such a large project, because as Obe said, the price tag was reasonable from my perspective. And then I also they seem to be very thoughtful about the habitat improvements. And every time we had a question about, did you think of this? The answer was always yes. And they had good answers. And so I think it's to be commended. Seems like a solid project.
Yeah. Anna?
I was actually going to comment on the sheer scale of the project, which you can learn about in numbers, but being there in person, you really get a sense of the scale in a way that I don't think we would have gotten otherwise. In addition to what you said, Lisa, I really also liked how they thought not just about how to design the project for restoration, but they actually thought of it as a way to study the process of restoration. And so I think it'll keep yielding information that we can use, scientifically speaking, for decades to come. And to me, the most incredible thing was that the project literally just completed a couple of weeks ago, as parts of it, as far as I understand, and already the degree to which you could see vegetation coming up and the degree to which the water was already being used by a huge variety of waterfowl. We saw river otters, we saw beaver. It was just incredible. And the weather cooperated, which is also always very nice. But I have to say that I think that, speaking for myself, I understood the project and gained a sense of appreciation for it in a way that would not have been possible simply through a presentation. So I want to add my thanks to those of my colleagues. It was really a memorable experience.
Well,
Yes, I'd just like to add my voice to all the other kudos that have been given to the project. It was truly impressive, especially at that scale and what they were able to accomplish. And I guess I'm really excited by it because I see the project now is actually entering a phase where the ecological system will organize itself, the biophysical system will organize itself over the next 5 to 10 years. And that I think is going to be absolutely fantastic to follow. It's just there's so much that could happen there, and it could go in so many different ways, both good and not so good. And, I look at across that landscape, and on one hand, I can envision what we saw in the slough I guess it would be to the west, is it the canoe slough? I can envision that, but I can also envision the invasion of all sorts of exotic species and things that probably may not go as well as planned. And so I really hope that those in charge, the organizers, really have a comprehensive monitoring plan in place to at least be able to document and quantify the ecological changes that are going to take place everywhere from, the fish to the plants to the birds and so forth, because I think it's going to just make a great case study, for us to learn from. So anyway, many thanks to them. And
Yes, I
I
agree.
hope we as a board, we're able to follow up on that and learn as we go. So.
Yes, and I hope they can keep the invasives out.
Mhm.
Yes, there are quite a few threats there, I think. So do we have any public comments on this topic?
Let me just double check really quick. Deirdre, I see you're back online. If you have a public comment, can you do the raised hand? All right, Deirdre, you should have the ability to unmute your microphone. And before providing your public comment, can you just clarify which agenda item you're commenting on, the previous one or this one? Thank you.
Thank you very much. I was having resolved the technical difficulties. I was hoping to comment on the previous item. I did want to say that I've been looking at the Trump transition very closely, and the concern is they signed an MOU with the Biden administration, and they're not using any of the federal government offices or computers to plan the transition. And they're just going to parachute their teams in on day one. And I think most of, there's going to be a sudden replacement. I think most of it is going to be targeted at the intelligence agencies and DOJ, Department of Justice. But it's probably good to be prepared for there to be some disruption at NOAA. It turns out I have been concerned about getting backups of NOAA's climate data. Climate scientists, there's 1 petabyte of climate data, and they're literally talking about maybe talking about the internet bandwidth to the servers, and maybe it would be more feasible to drive a whole bunch of hard drives to the data center. So anyway, we're in very uncertain times as far as the federal administration, and I would just I hope there isn't disruption in websites and data availability, but I would suggest being prepared for that. And also talking with the federal partners. Thank you.
Thank you, Deidre, and I'm sorry I called you Lisa earlier. I would like to acknowledge that Diane McKnight joined us. Do you have any any new declarations, Diane?
I have no new declarations. I apologize for being late. I won't be able to be here for the whole meeting, and I realize I've left my glasses in my car, and I'll be right back. Okay.
All right. Okay, thank you. Okay, agenda item 4 is a discussion on the planned climate science research symposium. To give you some background, the Delta ISB plans to organize and host a public symposium in early 2025 on the current state of climate science and to understand how organizations in the region are considering climate change in their work. The draft prospectus was circulated for public comments, which closed on November 19th, and we received quite a few of them. So I would like to turn over to Obi to provide an overview of the public comments and lead a discussion on how to address them.
Thank you, Inga. Before I start on the public comments, I want to thank Margot and Edwin for kind of sending us those comments recently, and Margot particularly for going over those and basically updating, having some comments on the online version of the prospectus, reflecting some of the comments. I think before I suggest what we do, to comment on the, I guess, public comments that we have received, I felt like they were all very supportive of this effort. In fact, some of them were very enthusiastic about this. And I think, which was pretty encouraging, and I reflect the fact that it is very timely. And the other aspect is, given the rapid evolution of the science in this, and we see some events like the atmospheric rivers happening even in this area and hurricanes in Florida, maybe the climate itself is rapidly changing. We're not sure, but maybe a reflection of the warming that's happening. But I think it's timely for us to have this symposium. And, one common theme was that there are many efforts underway or have been in by DWR and other agencies in the region. I think it would not be prudent for us to not look at them and make sure we are not duplicating some of the efforts that are already underway. So, for example, the 5th climate assessment for California and some of the updated sea level rise projections, and in particular, the Delta Adapt report that we are just reviewing. So there's a lot of information that could be useful for. And there's also, and as you know, we had 2 objectives. One is the climate science piece, and the other one is how the climate science is being used for actual projects and restoration planning and others. So that part of the scope is broadening based on some of the suggestions. There were suggestions on need to include environmental justice, the social aspects of it, and some of the other like HABs into the discussion. So that's something we need to decide, how broad we want to, expand the scope to cover that objective number 2. I think objective number 1 on the climate science update is fairly clear. And also we have a, spreadsheet of suggested speakers. Anyway, so I won't go into specifics of all the 9 comments that we have received, and particularly some of them were very useful and useful suggestions we have. We need to consider. So in terms of where we go from here, and I just talked to Anna, we didn't talk before, but I think since 2 of us are planning this for the board. It looks like, and I think there was a suggestion to have 2 days of symposia, I guess, 1 day for, my suggestion is have 1 day for climate science piece and take a little break and try to organize the second piece around the objective number 2, how they are being used, and then carefully plan the panels and the participants and the speakers. So I think that's kind of one of the suggestions I have in it. I guess Anna also had the same suggestion. I just read your email on that. So I think that is useful way to move forward. And I would like to ask other members if they have any reflections from the comments they received, or Anna, you want to chime in?
Sure, thank you, Obey. So yes, I also reviewed all of the comments that were received. I would say, consistent with what Obey said, they essentially fell under, I would say, three categories. One is background information that is already out there that we should make sure to take into account as we plan for the workshop, so that it's not duplicative of work that has already been done. That's absolutely easy to do and point well taken. Second is a number of suggestions of specific speakers, and we will absolutely add those to the spreadsheet of potential speakers. We obviously won't be able to incorporate everyone. I think we're already up to 20 plus potential speakers, and we'll have to make some choices. The third and more substantive one is the one that Obey was just discussing, which is how do you bound the scope of the workshop itself? And the main tension is, to what extent do you keep it primarily focused around the physical changes to the climate system and then downstream impacts of that, versus to what extent do you consider research and science on how one responds to those changes in terms of adaptation, management, decision-making, and so on. And those are absolutely very important perspectives to include. However, I think that both Obey and my thoughts on this is that if we try to include too much in a one-day workshop, we'll end up with a very high-level overview, but perhaps not enough substance to really dig into some of the matters. And so my reaction, which it sounds was consistent to Obey's reaction, was that for this initial workshop, to keep it as a one-day workshop, focusing very much on the physical climate change perspectives themselves. And then at the end of that workshop, to make a decision as to whether we want to have a follow-on one-day workshop and how we would scope that second workshop to include more of the management decision-making adaptation aspects that are already slightly in the perspectives, but that many of the comments asked for much more in this regard. And so I think that's something that we should discuss as a board. If that's the way that we move forward, I would just recommend that we include one or two sentences in the current perspectives stating that at the end of the first workshop, we will make a decision as to whether to have a second workshop later in the year that would then address more of the response to climate change rather than the climate change itself. And so that's how I read the feedback that we received and my initial opinion as to how we should move forward.
Yeah, I think I forgot to mention I feel like prospectus is ready to be approved with some minor changes, like the one that Anna just mentioned. Because we, according to our schedule in December, we need to start inviting some of the speakers for the first workshop, and maybe in January prepare the agenda for it. So if the board agrees with this day separated by a couple of months, maybe, I feel like the second workshop should focus on objective number 2, I think, which is because we have to respond to that objective and also listen to some of the comments. So we may want to take, some time to organize that and decide who should be invited, because there are many players in this field, in this, federal agencies, the state agencies, and NGOs and others. So we need to carefully think about how to organize that. And I think it will be very productive what we come out of that. Particularly some of the studies, like even Delta Adapt, I think vulnerability assessment was done probably 6-7 years ago. Are they still up to date in view of what we know now in terms of science? So I think there is some valuable input to ongoing processes in our review. So anyway, I agree with that, maybe with minor changes to the prospectus. Maybe we should approve it, is what I'm thinking. Anyway, I'll leave it at that now.
Yeah, let's hear from the members of the board on this first. Lisa.
I'm helping you see the name plate being turned. Yeah, I really appreciate that there's a lot in this topic and you can't cover it all in one day. You're trying to keep this relatively narrow. I do, though, want a little more clarity on what you think the ideal outcome of focusing on the physical processes is, because I do think, there are a lot of modelers out there. There's a lot of data tools out there. And so I see heading toward recommendations to fully support the co-equal goals of the Delta. These are some of the gaps in the climate change information, or this is the way they need to be post-processed or something. That seems like kind of a good goal. And I wonder, how much do we get there by focusing on the physical, and how much do we depend on the second day?
Yeah, maybe a quick response to Lisa. I think, there were like some comments, what climate drivers, right, are important. And I think we mentioned the extremes on both sides of the spectrum of climate, precipitation or droughts. I think we want to get the latest science on that. But also in the first workshop, my thought was, maybe what sometimes we call downstream impacts, maybe other related impacts could be expected from those changes in the drivers. And in the prospectus, we said we would have a technical memorandum of sort, or maybe Maven's, proceedings possibility, and also maybe even have a journal article. I think those would be useful, but I agree with you, Lisa, that we don't want to just speak about the climate drivers unless we see how they might be impacting what we are doing in terms of project and processes in the region. So I'm hoping in the first workshop, we will cover those aspects, maybe at a higher level, for it to be useful.
I can add one super quick comment. One topic that keeps coming up is one of scale, right? So to what extent is the resolution of the climate models that are typically used today a limitation to understanding impacts on much smaller scales, such as certain regions of the Delta? That to me is a question that falls squarely within this objective one, but the answer to which could still be very useful in terms of us having recommendations for how one might work to bridge those scales, for example. So I think there are, I don't think we want, I think there are questions and recommendations that would fall more neatly within objective one, which is not at all to discount the incredible importance of the second objective as well. But I think your question, Lisa, was what recommendations or actionable information can we get out of a day that's focused purely on the more, let's say, physical climate drivers? So scale is one that always comes to my mind when I think about that.
Yes, I really think the day 2 goals of the workshop are very important. So I'm wondering why you want to make the day 2 contingent on the results of the day 1 effort, rather than planning a second day right away.
Maybe my choice of words was not precise enough. I could imagine that the exact scope that we would want for the day 2 and the needs that we would see in terms of what to cover on the day 2 would partially depend on what we would learn from the day 1. And so in the spirit of adaptive management also, right, my instinct would be not to necessarily finalize the scope and the agenda for day 2, especially if they are actually going to be a couple of months apart, so that we have that flexibility to have the day 1 inform what we then look at in a potential
So the
day 2.
content, the content of the day 2 and the exact details.
Yeah.
Okay, I misunderstood that. Yes.
Yeah, if
I
I
think
can
I might
add to
have
it. I think I agree that, a couple of reasons. One is we might learn a lot from day 1 because, what the last 6 to 10 years we have learned in terms of climate science or physical changes, and we would need some time to kind of absorb those and see how they have been used or not used in the ongoing, so that to set the content. by just having the day 2 right after day 1, we might not have that opportunity to review what the outcome of the day 1 would be and set the content for day 2.
Yeah, this makes perfect sense. I
Right.
just understood that you
Right.
weren't sure if you would have that day too, but it
Yeah.
sounds like you are planning to have that, just you're going to define the details and the content of it based on the day 1 workshop. Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's partially speaks to my sort of trouble with commitment in general, but but what if at the end of day 1 we realize that really the scope of what we need to cover in quote unquote day 2 is really so broad that maybe it's a 2-day workshop or something like that. I was trying to hedge a little bit in terms of how we would describe that second component in the current proposal so that we wouldn't sort of back ourselves into too much of a box that we may decide may not fit in the end.
Yeah. No, I understand now. That's good. All right, Virginia.
So I think it does make sense to have the 2 workshops as you're describing now with some time in between them. And to foster that occurring, I think it would help a lot to have something like a panel discussion at the end of that first day, where you could have 2 or 3 speakers, but also audience discussion, and as well as questions that people are asking at the end of that first day that would be about what would a second workshop be. And if people answer those questions while they're in the room, you often get feedback and you receive feedback than if you wait till later. So I think if you plan this and let people know, you might get a lot of good input that would really help in that second workshop.
Or maybe even the time for breakout session or something like that, so that people can speak in smaller groups and bring ideas forward.
That would be good too, yeah.
Do we have any more questions, comments from the board? No? Kenny moves.
Yeah, I just wonder, I understand the narrowing so that it's doable, but also the optics of a kind of physical only climate change workshop and trying not to deal with the issues surrounding that about climate justice, environmental justice, all those things. But the second workshop, I guess I wasn't quite following. What's the second workshop? How does it differ from?
In the prospectus, we had 2 clear objectives, right? One is the physical climate science updates of sort, right? What happens to what is the changing frequency and magnitude of atmospheric rivers, or maybe, changing magnitude and frequency of droughts, and how they might evolve into the future. And the other, issue was the downscaling. So the physical science update. But the second workshop is and I think like, which suggested, maybe we can have a short discussion on, okay, now that we know how these physical characteristics are going to change in the climate, what are the other impacts that we need to think about? At the end of the first day, we can have a short discussion on that. But in the second workshop, I expect we would dive deeply into how these have been used or not used in ongoing efforts, how they should be used, and what some recommendations as to where we should be going with that. Because I think in the comment there were a lot of recommendations for us to look at how they are being addressed in ongoing efforts like Delta Adapt and others.
Right.
So review those and see are there any changes, or are they adequate for now to address these new findings that we may have from the first workshop. That's my thoughts on that.
The uses might include equity issues,
That's
but it
correct.
might include fish responses.
That's right.
Right. And
That's right.
so it just seems like the second one's very broad.
Yeah, it is. That's why we need some time to organize it carefully. That's why I was wondering, how do we limit the scope and carefully plan the panels for that?
Yeah, that's what I was wondering how. Okay, time will help. So
Yeah, so, as it, just to expand on this conversation, as it's currently written, right, the first objective is to explore current climate projections for the region and related uncertainties. And then among the 8 more detailed questions that we had, those that relate to that first goal are ones, for example, what are the important climate drivers for planning under future conditions? What are state-of-the-art projections for the Delta region based on existing climate scenarios? What do we know about the potential for compounding effects? How reliable are current downscaled climate products? What types of uncertainties and projections are most, sorry, not that one. And then what, if anything, is missing for incorporating into existing models? And then we had the second objective, which is written as how are organizations in Delta incorporating climate change into their decision-making? And that's the one that is very, very broad. Currently, in the questions that we have, those are really covered under these very broad questions. How can understanding of evolving impacts and risks help to build resilience in the region is one example. And the second one is how are organizations in the Delta region integrating climate projections into planning? And so those are huge, as you say, right? And so I think the concern is that if we try to cover all of those equally, then we won't really get depth on either. And if we just try to cover the second one through a couple of talks, we're really shortchanging what is really a huge field. So I think that's the thinking behind. Let's touch on those, and I really like Virginia's idea of maybe closing with a discussion of those near the end of the workshop. But then let's really give us ourselves the space and the time to talk about those in much more detail in a second phase. I think you raised another good point, which is where do you draw the line, right? So things like Fisher responses, is that day one, or is that the future day two? And we'd have to think about how to draw that line in a way that doesn't have things that fall through the cracks, so that they're not quite day one, but they're not quite day two. And I think we can do that by a very careful selection of the speakers that we put on the agenda and how we task them in terms of what to include in their presentation. So I think that's something to keep an eye on, but I think we can navigate that.
Yeah, and I think you summarized it with, I was a little thrown off by the specificity of the questions, which was great for the first one. And then it looked like it just widened very broadly. And so, but I make sense. I think it's very timely and all that. It's a huge topic. So how do you divide it up and not leave out important ones is very tough. But you can't do everything. So,
and I think that's where some of the comments come in that, oh, I'm sorry.
That's okay. I just wanted to throw in, I mean, there's always the possibility of having a day 3 sometime in the future, right? If needed.
Sure.
I'm not sure I was suggesting that, but
I just wanted to open the mind to that thought.
No, one thing, just quickly, I'm sorry, maybe somebody else is trying to speak, but maybe you can add some names for that day 2 potential candidates, not just the science, but how the climate, evolution of the climate itself might be impacting those many other things that you mentioned. If you have some names, it'd be good to have that on the spreadsheet. So when we select the panels for the day 2, we can carefully evaluate all the potential speakers so that our panelists could be in one of those too.
I was just going to add that, and some of the comments speak to this as well, right? I think it is a huge scope. At the same time, clearly this is not the first time that the community is thinking about these questions. And so that's where making sure to build on the foundation of all of the thinking and the writing and the research that had been done previously and that's already covered in existing reports and papers should be a foundation. And here we only focus on the things that either are brand new or have not been discussed previously, because otherwise, again, what we want to avoid, at least what I certainly want to avoid, is a sort of plain vanilla workshop where we repeat much of the information that we already know, and really just focus on that bleeding edge of either what has fundamentally changed, what has been fundamentally unexpected. I mean, I'm thinking, and also I think scale again. So thinking specifically at the scale of the Delta. And there are, unexpected things. And so speaking not necessarily for the Delta, but there was this great op-ed in the New York Times just November 12th or 13th. So 3 weeks ago, talking about the fact that the scale of warming that we observed every month in 2023 and 2024 is categorically outside what any of the climate projections would have expected. And so that type of finding, but within the context of the Delta, is where I see the sweet spot of really looking at having new discussions that would not have already been part of existing documents.
And I've seen your raised hand.
So the way I see this being discussed makes a lot of sense, and it makes me think about the style of these workshops. Since in my mind, it sounds like the first workshop is kind of coming to agreement on what are the climate change issues to be discussed. It might be very helpful for much of that workshop be in one room so that people with different perspectives to come to some agreement. Whereas as Kenny proposed it, fish versus equity, they're really different. That's workshop 2 might be better organized as several different breakout groups to have people with those expertise talk together. So that's just a thought about how they might differ.
Diane, you had a comment?
I was following this discussion and building on what others have said. There may be some areas or groups that are considering climate change in a way that not everyone else is aware of, that it's new and incipient, and it can be helpful in a workshop forum for others, and even in different topics, to see how some different other groups are going about the same challenging task. And so not having some update about what's new, but also kind of started might be helpful in terms of, we want to avoid, well, it's just so complicated and it's so hard and the scale is so large and it's daunting to do this. If there's some area either in environmental justice or fisheries or wherever, that might be good to include. That's just a thought.
All right. Bob.
I really don't have anything to add. That's my statement. But I did want to actually just say I'm very supportive of what I've heard so far, especially Obey, Virginia, and Anna, your suggestions on how it should be organized and what the content might be. And anyway, I do have a question though. I was wondering in terms of bringing everybody up to speed on this, so you're all starting from the same base by the time you have the first, I would say the first symposium or whatever it might be. Are you thinking about preparing a short white paper that actually summarizes our current understanding of climate change and where the pitfalls are or what's missing, in order to prepare the participants and the audience so that we're all starting from the same spot? So.
Obey can volunteer. I don't think I can volunteer to write such a white paper beforehand.
No.
I wonder if potentially though, what maybe a middle ground would be is to have, what I want to say is have some advanced reading beforehand, but what I want to avoid is to assign 500 pages of reading, which then nobody will do, and therefore we're no further along. But if we could spend a bit of time maybe putting together a much more focused, narrower set of reading that we would recommend ahead of the workshop, that might be achievable. I don't know whether the sort of cost reward on writing a white paper in preparation for a workshop would necessarily be something that I want to volunteer to do.
I agree with that. I think I mean, this is a very good point. I think some of the comments suggested, the fifth climate assessment, talk to the people who are running that, Delta Adapt or, many others, right? I think it will not be wise for us not to look at those in advance of the first one. Now, how we do it is a question. We don't want to read, reports that are 500 pages long, and we have Margot. We can probably, get help from her. But I think one option is to maybe talk to some lead people on each of those and kind of have a conversation and write a 1 or 2 page summary of finding for the board. We have until March, maybe February or so to do that. Not volunteering, but that might be a best way to inform the rest of the board. Okay, this is what we know, what has been done. That might be very helpful for the entire board. So that's kind of one suggestion I have. Don't write a complete summary of all those reports, but can we get the sort of an executive summary of what has been, what's the state of science that has been used in these efforts to date?
No, I would agree with that. I never thought a white paper would be very long or it would be absolutely comprehensive. But it would help bring everybody together so they're starting from somewhat the same page,
Right.
In the beginning. And I think the people that you invite are going to be very knowledgeable, but then there's people like myself who are not up on the current literature and the state of the knowledge, and a short white paper or a summary would be very helpful for folks like myself. And this is a bit of an aside, and you can decide to use it or not, but I was thinking, with all this, the AI craze, the things that are going on now, is if you couldn't almost have an AI summary of, of the key literature and, just pass it around so it brings us up to speed rather quickly. So anyway, that's
I was
my
thinking the
comment.
same
I'm
thing,
very
but I was
supportive.
biting my tongue to hesitate that we use AI for this task. But
I
it seems
know.
but I think it's a point well taken. I think again, it's probably not realistic for Obey and myself to spend, let's say tens of hours summarizing the literature, but having some way to bring people to the same page, recognizing that not everyone works in this area as their primary area of focus is valid. So we can think about how to do that effectively. And I agree that AI has become surprisingly good at summarizing things, and that's one of its strengths.
Okay, Virginia had a comment.
That's exactly what I was going to suggest. I've been involved in a project recently where the participants all suggested their favorite papers, ended up with 50 papers, and a postdoc worked with AI to come up with a 2-page summary that everyone was very happy with, actually.
There's a good idea. Great.
Yeah.
You mentioned you wanted to write a publication, but that's after. The
Yeah,
workshop.
that would be after, I think. But so we'll have to kind of explore the idea of how do we get this 2 or 3 page summary done. But I feel like actually some of us really need to know what is there before we go into the first workshop, I think. So we need to spend some time on that among all the other things you have to do. But anyway, so, are we ready to kind of approve the prospectus with the changes that have been suggested? So.
All right, Edmund, you had a.
We do have public comments, but I also have a few clarifying questions for the prospectus. So I believe the prospectus is currently written as if we're going to plan 2 of the symposiums or the 2-day event at the same time. It seems like based on the discussion today, it'll be kind of sequential. So I think that will have to be revised in the prospectus. And then we also got comments from Bob that maybe preparing some sort of short little summary or recommended reading list. So I'm just wondering, just in terms of the time frame of planning, do we still want to try to aim for March for the first event, or do we want to kind of postpone it to the May date that's also in the prospectus based on what we're hearing from public comments and discussion from today?
Yeah, that's a good point. March is only 3-4 months away, and we always, underestimate time it takes to do things sometimes. But maybe sometime in January we can decide, but we can leave March as it is for now, and it's like our target date, but if these other things take time, we can like January or February, we can decide, if that's okay with you.
Oh yeah, I think we could modify the perspective,
Right.
put those contingencies
Yeah.
in, but I also have like another, Virginia, you can respond, I think.
Well, I was gonna say, the AI summary that I talked about was developed in a week.
Mhm. But I also, you also need to identify the speakers
Right.
and find a date that works for all of them, so
Right.
that might not, you
Yes,
know.
that's correct. And I think sometime maybe early January, we need to start preparing a list of potential speakers for the first workshop. That may include some people who actually use the information, but who's familiar with climate science piece. So
Yeah.
we have to kind of jointly design, who are the speakers and, structure that first workshop in some way.
Yeah, that was actually one of my questions. Do you have a list of speakers identified?
We have a spreadsheet of full list of speakers, mostly on climate science. But maybe I ask other ISB members to look at that spreadsheet and add if you see anyone is missing. I do want to mention that this is Bay Delta region focus. So we are not trying to cover the science of global climate change unless it's relevant to what we are talking about here. So we want kind of limit this focus for the scope of this for our region, unless some global, physical factors affect us in this region. So we have to kind of use that spreadsheet to come up with the preliminary list. I mean, maybe we can, for the next meeting, I'm not trying to commit anything, but maybe come up with a suggested list of speakers and draft, maybe structure for the.
Yeah, I think the focus on the Bay Delta makes a lot of sense. Yeah.
And the spreadsheet already has 20 names on it or so, so clearly not everyone will ultimately be invited, but I think if we could, if other ISB members were willing to, maybe even in the next week or 10 days, send us additional names,
Right.
then we can start to categorize them by topic and then pick the most appropriate name within each category. And so we're obviously, we each have the scope or the breadth of speakers to cover the breadth of the questions that we had in the prospectus.
Yeah, well, one other action maybe I would like to, I don't know, maybe Anna and I could talk to some key people on the phone and kind of push some ideas and suggestions and see this is how the way we are structuring this. Some of the key people, particularly from the agencies, I think that might be helpful if I can make a call or we can make a call and maybe get some ideas or suggestions.
I think that's a good idea. Yeah.
Yeah.
People who are actually working in the system.
Right. I mean, there are some names already in the spreadsheet, but particularly those big projects that are being worked on, the 5th climate assessment, Delta Adapt, and many of the others, some key authors of those or facilitators of those efforts. Some people who are familiar with the climate science, I think.
Yeah. Makes sense. Lauren has her name tag up. Oh, you switched.
Oh, we became different people.
Okay.
Oh no, that was just from the before. So I'm putting it down.
Okay. So, okay.
But we do have a public comment.
Yes, I have not forgotten. I just wanted to make sure we didn't have any more comments, questions from the board. Is everything clear?
Let me ask Virginia, is it possible for you to share that summary that was prepared so we get a sense of what it looks like?
I don't know.
All right,
Since
that's
it's AI, it's not really something to go further. I don't know that you're going to get much value.
I just would like to see it.
That.
Yeah.
Okay, I can ask, but
Anyway,
I don't
just
know.
curious. That's all.
okay, I'll put it in my list. I should
Great.
All right. Okay, so we have a public comment. Please, let's hear it.
Yeah, so we have one from Deirdre Desjardins. Deirdre, you have the ability to unmute your microphone. Thank you.
So there was a paper that just came out earlier this year, that I've been trying to track down, and I did find it. As you know, I've been talking about the pattern effect research and the pattern of surface warming is in the Pacific Ocean is different than the models, and then climate models project. And it is there is some new research by researchers at Colorado State University in Fort Collins, Maria Rugenstein and Mark Alessi. And I'll just read the abstract. Near-term projections of drought in the Southwest US are uncertain. The observed decrease in Southwest US precipitation since the 1980s and heightened drought conditions since the 2000s have been linked to cooling sea surface temperature trend in the equatorial Pacific. Notably, climate models fail to reproduce these observed sea surface temperature trends, and they may continue doing so in the future. Here we assess the sensitivity of Southwest US precipitation projections to future sea surface temperature using a Green's function approach. Our findings reveal that a slight distribution of sea surface temperature leads to a wetting or drying of the Southwest US. A reversal of the observed cooling trend in the Central and East Pacific over the next few decades would lead to a period of wetting in the Southwest US. It is critical to consider the impact of possible sea surface temperature pattern trends on Southwest US precipitation trends until we fully trust sea surface temperature evolution and climate models. So this does confirm, I have been looking at nonlinear trends in precipitation, and there's a very clear reduction, declining trend around the same time we had emerged globally from the warming hiatus around 2013. And it's associated with this pattern effect. So anyway, I did give it to you. Rugenstein was also a co-author on the synthesis of the US climate variability and adaptation symposium on the pattern effect in 2022. So she would be an excellent person to brief you on that. This is really rapidly breaking research. And so thank you.
Thank you very much. Deirdre, does anybody want to respond to the comment? Obi?
Yeah, we'll look at that paper, add it to our reference list, and also look, try to see if that person would be a good addition to our list. And we'll add that name to the list.
All right, great. Thank you for that. So next, does everybody feel that we can vote on the current draft prospectus for this symposium? I'm becoming more careful after last time. All right, in that case, we need a motion to approve the prospectus with the condition that Obi and Anna revise and finalize it based on the discussion today. Do we have a motion?
So moved.
Right. Do we have a second? Thank you, Virginia. Wonderful. All right, let's do a vote. Virginia?
Yes, I approve.
Tanya?
Yes, I approve.
Tom is no longer here, so Anna?
Yes.
Diane?
Yes.
Bob?
Yes.
Obi?
Yes.
Kenny?
Yes.
Lisa?
Yes.
and a yes from me as well. So we have this approved and can move forward. And after this, we have a break. We're a little bit ahead of schedule, which is great. So we'll take a 15-minute break now and reconvene at 10:20. Of December 2024. We continue with agenda item 5, which is a discussion of the Delta Adapts draft adaptation plan of the Delta Stewardship Council. That just gives a little bit of background on that. The Delta Stewardship Council has recently published a draft adaptation plan as part of its climate initiative, Delta Adapts. The draft details strategies and actions to improve regional resilience to climate change, including cost estimations and governance recommendations. The draft plan and supporting documentation are available for public review and comment through January 17th, 2025. At the June meeting, we received a presentation from the council and expressed interest in commenting on the plan when it is released. We will use this meeting to discuss initial thoughts about the draft Delta Adapts plan and the process for conducting the review. We have asked the council for some additional time to submit comments, which has been granted. So I'll hand over to Obi, who offered to take the lead on this.
All right, thank you, Inga. So I looked at the I guess the draft plan and review. I get 60-day review right now. When you say receive the extension, do you have the new date?
I'm not sure.
We kept it flexible. We told the council that you won't have a meeting until like the end of January. So we probably won't have something until like early to mid-February, but we kept it kind of flexible based on how the discussion goes.
So I looked at the report, but before that, I think, it's a very comprehensive report. I mean, it covers all complexities of Delta and many aspects, the social aspects and infrastructure, climate change adaptation. So my initial impression, and I think we can get some comments and more importantly, contributions from board members on the review comments that I can integrate into a response letter. So it looks like this effort started, and somebody can correct me if I'm wrong here, somewhere around like 6 years ago, 2018. And as background, it builds on 2 or 3 other important documents. One is the vulnerability assessment that was done in 2018, and that's probably where much of the modeling was done. And then there's a Delta plan that was built later and a couple of other documents. And this is kind of in my opinion, maybe a culmination of all of those efforts into one plan, which is very comprehensive. And the initial suggestion was, given the time frame that we have and given the holidays coming up and all that, and I think the members were asked to provide comments by December 20th. I don't know if that's still feasible or not, but I think the initial suggestion was to review executive summary and chapters 1 and 3. So my concern was, can we do a good review without going back and looked at those previous documents that were used to build this on? Particularly, I mean, we were talking about DMDU and climate change issues. If they were done in 2018, does it use the latest climate science in building this plan, for example, for adaptation strategies? But for us to go back and look at all those documents could be another EIR type review, which took a long time for us because we were reviewing, I don't know, somewhere upwards of 30 some chapters, right? So that's something we need to, I think some of you may have ideas of how to focus on our review given the time frame, so that, you know, is reviewing chapters 1 and 3 and executive summary, is that sufficient for us to provide some useful comments? And the other thing is, I think there was suggestions in the, you know, yesterday that perhaps we should also provide recommendations as to what might be missing and what needs to be done on the plan. So that's where I am. I offered to write the response letter for the board. It's good to hear that there might be more time given the climate workshop work we may have to do. So I would like to ask members, would you review all the 3 chapters or 3 documents, 1, 3, and executive summary or any others, and provide me with comments that I can integrate into the letter by the timeline we agree upon. So anyway, that's my initial comments, and I think some of you have, I understand, may have read the report and have some comments.
Could you remind us of what those chapters are?
Executive summary, chapter 1 and 3, I think was the staff suggestion.
Okay.
1 is the introduction and 3 is a strategy.
The strategy, okay.
Yeah,
So
it might not be
ignore the
adequate
others.
for us to provide good comments. I'm not sure, but I mean, that will be easy for us, but I don't know if that's sufficient for us to provide some useful comments and recommendations.
Okay, I'd like to open the discussion for the other members. Do you have thoughts on that, Lisa?
Like I'm always first out of the gate.
That's okay.
So first of all, I think it's okay if we don't go back and make it more complicated by looking at the originating documents, because we can always scope the review, you know, say this is all we did and then manage expectations accordingly, right? So I think that's a strategy we could use. I don't know if I agree with this only looking at chapters. The executive summary, it basically refers to all the chapters. And if there's an issue in the executive summary you want to know more about, you have to read the chapter. So I don't know how well that works. But anyway, that's aside, that's logistics. But I do actually have some comments about what I think the document could benefit from. So I was particularly struck by the agriculture chapter. And I think it personifies some of the issues I'm seeing that are perhaps consistent throughout, which is there's a need to pay more attention to incentives rather than just stating this is how adaptation should occur. There's not as much how as I might like, and maybe that's part of a different document. But I do think that raising the issue of incentives, and I know there's people in the council that understand this well. I mean, if you look at Morgan Chow's response to yours, she talks a lot about incentives and using existing programs. So I know this isn't news to them, but the question is, how is the document being framed and how's it coming across? And to me, I see prescriptions that don't, and I know these were based very much in a stakeholder process, and so I'm sure they have quite a lot of merit. But when I look at the agricultural recommendations, I start thinking, well, there's already federal programs that provide incentives for these, and they're discussing trade-offs that have already been managed through program rules, say through EQIP and CRP. They've grappled with many of these questions already. And so it just feels a little odd that they're saying, this is how farming should change. as opposed to let's offer farmers some incentives that promote these goals and let them figure out what works for their farm. And so, things like that, that just have me a little concerned. And then also just in terms of, is this really turning into something that's an adaptive management framework? Or, is there any process by seeing which recommendations get taken up and which ones don't, and changing things in order to understand what's working? I didn't see any of that in there either, which again, may not be appropriate for this document, but it seems to me that would strengthen the knowledge about these recommendations. So those are just some overarching comments. I'm happy to write up some things. And send them.
I think that would be very useful for you to write. I mean, those could be some of the recommendations we make. And one issue I forgot to mention, we also need to identify, are there dependencies between the actions that are suggested? And if I think individual agencies are assigned to implement some of these actions, those dependencies may matter. And I think that's something we can also recommend. It'd be nice to have a dependency chart, some sort of a project management chart type showing the dependencies. Anyway, yeah, leave it for other comments.
Anybody else? Bob?
Where to begin? I guess I feel after reading this, I read quickly the summary in chapters 1 and 3, and then I did read the chapter on ecosystems.
Bob, turn his mic on.
Is that better? Okay, very good. I did read the chapter on ecosystems, and it really left me unsettled, because I guess my expectations is that it was going to lead with the science that's needed about ecosystems, what's missing. And in discussions with Dylan yesterday a little bit, I come to realize that I guess a lot of the information, the basic information about ecosystems actually contained in evaluations were contained in a report that came out, I think, in 2018 or 2019, something along those lines. And so there were two things that left me unsettled about this. One is ecosystems started out, and it was all about human dimensions, essentially human science, rather than the science, the ecological science about ecosystems. That they were leading with the human dimension rather than the ecological considerations, which is something which was my expectation, I guess. And then it started me thinking after the discussion with Dylan yesterday, it started me thinking is I wonder if the foundation is good, the scientific foundation around ecosystems. Would I agree with it, which meant that I needed to go back and actually look at and read what was done in 2018 or 19, which I have not done yet. So I'm feeling very unsettled about all this at the moment, and I guess I feel that I personally need to go back and take a look at what was prepared as the scientific foundation 6 or 7 years ago to see if this still rings true or not. So those are my two comments on why I feel unsettled. I've made lots of notes on the document here, Obey, and I'll summarize those and send them to you in time. But
that would be great.
But I also need to, I guess, read this some more and try and be more articulate about what's bothering me than rather than just that I've got this unsettled feeling at the moment that it just isn't quite right. But I do agree, it's a highly ambitious document, highly ambitious, and the early parts are very, very well written and very, very articulate. So, but when we get down to actually the science that needs to be done, I'm feeling uncomfortable about that.
Thank you, Bob. Virginia?
So I did go through it in some detail at first, and then I ended up just looking at tables and figures toward the middle, and then I read the conclusions kind of carefully. So I have some particular comments that I can share with you, but I'll give you the overview of that and end with the most important one, I think. So they talk about risks, but they don't ever talk about wildfire risks. And I don't know what those are here. So I'd like to see some of that. And they talk about ecosystem restoration. And they have a really nice glossary, but restoration is not in the glossary. And, you know, given you asked the question, what are you restoring to? I think discussion of what restoration is going to be important. And in the world where I work, people talk a lot about novel ecosystems, these new ecosystems we haven't seen before arising. And so is that concept important in novel and adapting here? I think it is. The incentivizing issue I also noted as well. They mentioned that, but they don't really talk about what it means and give examples. And like Lisa was saying, I think that's important. There was also some discussion of food security. And in my world, food security is largely related to the distribution, not the production of food. And then later down below, I found, yeah, that's what they're talking about too. But I think that needs to be put in the context of the importance of proper distribution to needy people. In terms of climate change, they talk about there needs to be awareness of the threats posed by climate change, but they don't talk about the relationship between climate change and other threats. And so the workshops that we're talking about are going to help with that. But I think that relationship needs to be made more clear. Let's see. Okay, so they talk a lot about actions focused on preserving existing agriculture. They say this will maintain a key driver, but what about adapting agricultural practices to what is needed? I think that should be emphasized or discussed as much as preserving current practices, because that's what this is all about. And then the conclusions, and this is where the figure that I've shared with you, Edmund, needs to be shown. They talk appropriately about a holistic approach to understanding and management in several places. And the figure I want to show is because I've said in so many of these meetings, we need a conceptual model. And then yesterday someone said, oh, here's our book of conceptual models. And I thought, uh-oh, that's not what I'm talking about. And what I have found useful, this figure that I'm showing came from when I worked on hypoxia in the Gulf of Mexico. It's a conceptual diagram. And to me, that is important because it is one diagram that kind of shows all the major features that are important in dealing with hypoxia in the Gulf of Mexico. So it shows the spatial relationship. And having this diagram in our committee was really helpful, because we could say, okay, now we're going to talk about food security. You know, where does that come in terms of this? And you can say, well, it's the co-benefits. And here are the other things that may or may not be effective, but it allowed us a visual way to conceive of what's important when we talk about the pieces, and it's put in a spatial context. So I challenge this group, maybe it's a different process and report, but to think about how to put together a conceptual diagram of the key influences on the Delta. I would love to see that. And I think it would help all of us kind of understand. And then when we talk about the particulars, to say what's important and what's not important. And then I have some comments on the glossary that I was really glad to see it, but some key terms are not included in it.
Okay, thank you, Virginia.
Yeah. If you want to see some really good conceptual diagrams, there was a program called Debrief, maybe 15 years ago.
Something like that.
And they went through a lot of the major ecological aspects of the Delta and did that. And they're quite good. And they probably are, I use them as an example of how you can do that. And they go through the stressors. And some are fish focused, but some are wetlands, some are open water. There's an open water one. So they may be a good template to use, but I guess I'm dating myself, huh? I don't know.
Me too.
All right. Back to this. I agree with, it was Lisa who said, I don't think it's fair to the document to only review a few of the chapters. I don't think it was meant to be used that way. So I think we would have to review the document or not. And I was a little, not as unsettled as Bob perhaps, but a little, because the beginning parts all are very much, who would argue with that? You know, we all want those things to happen. I was more encouraged when I got to chapter 8 in the implementation plan. And that started to add some more specificity on a regional by region basis to it. So I'm of mixed feelings. I don't think we either should not review it or we should really review it. I don't think we should end up in the middle. Right, I think we either give it a rigorous review or we pass, or whatever the term is. But I'm not sure a high level review of a high level document is that helpful. So I'm kind of I don't know where I am on that, and I'd love them to expand chapter 8, implementation roadmap. I think that would help a lot. And I think they know it. It's just not written for that audience. It's not written that way. But I guess after all that, I'm not sure where I stand. But if we're going to review it, I say we should not go back to background documents, but review it like we would a report. Otherwise, I worry it looks a little too much like we're stamping it. And in that case, I think we're better off not reviewing it. And it's very well written. It's clearly well thought out. It's a lot went into it. I don't question that. Maybe we could point out some things that could be strengthened.
Right. Thank you, Kenny. I agree with you. I think we should review all of it and not just individual chapters. And I think this document is really important. You know, it is really important and we should take it very seriously. So that's where I'm coming from. I haven't had time to read anything beyond the summary, but as always, you know, my pet peeve is the water quality, the narrow definition of water quality. And there clearly are consequences for inputs of contaminants to the system that are enhanced or triggered by climate change. You know, I'm just pulling it out of my top of my head, but pest control is one thing. You know, enhanced runoff through intense rain events, etc., is another thing that comes to mind. So I would like to see consideration or at least mention of that. So what do others think about taking this on?
Yeah.
Tanya.
Oh, yeah. Thanks, Inga. Yeah, just in listening to the conversation, I would agree that I think we should review the whole document, but my recommendation would be that we allow individual board members to focus on some of the chapters that may be more relevant to their expertise.
Of course,
we can comment on all the chapters, of course, but that might give us a little bit of a happy medium where we're still doing a rigorous review, but you know, if there's a chapter that we're not familiar with the science on, we can skim through it more quickly. And it does sound like we already have several recommendations for some things that could be clarified or improved or developed more. I haven't had time to read it in detail, but there are some chapters that I would like to put some more time into and also read through the whole report. And I do, like Kenny, I also think that the implementation roadmap is going to be really important. And there's also some things in the governance chapter around adaptive management that I think could be really important to just to put our eyes on. And yeah, I don't know if we need to go back to some of the source documents. I think we could still do a fairly rigorous review of the report without having to dive deeply into all of the initial documents that fed into this, but
I
my two
do have a
cents.
question actually based on this discussion. I'm curious, I mean, this issue of not looking at the background documents is kind of troublesome to me. Not that I'm advocating it, but I'm wondering, for example, the vulnerability assessment for this Delta plan or this was done in 2018. I think if, as I understand it, 2021, yeah. So I'm wondering, what we are seeing and your observations are based on the fact that maybe the background used for developing this plan was based on some knowledge that was, let's say, 5 years ago. It would be nice maybe as a recommendation to provide summary of what were the basic assumptions of the current condition and future condition used for developing this adaptation plan. If that might avoid us looking at all the other documents. I don't know. I would, unless it is there, maybe I missed it. What were the assumptions that were fundamental to the development of Delta Adapt? And I don't know if it is there. That may be something that's coming out of this discussion that we don't see this or that. I don't know. I'm just asking that question.
My impression was, but I could be wrong, is that this document is more general than, and I don't know if we need that level of detail.
Yeah, if it is a general document, I guess we can provide some good recommendation what should be done. I think somebody highlighted that might be more valuable for this. So whether it's relevant or not, it might be good to have some recommendations from us based on just this document if we don't want to go back to the original assumptions of how the plan evolved.
Kenny has his tag up. Kenny?
Yeah, so I think we have to be careful that we're not doing what we think the document should do. If you read it and it's not, you don't think they provide some substantial evidence for it, that's your comment. I don't think we need to go back and provide that evidence, right? If you don't understand it, then that's the comment, right? And they can use appendices, they can do whatever they want to address it or ignore us or whatever they want. But I worry that we we slowly slide into doing the work that really the comment is they should have provided that information. So that would be my,
fair enough.
I say that and I'll probably go read the other one myself, but you know what I mean? We're reviewing a document that says it should be a standalone document.
Right.
So I'm less worried about reading what led to it. In this case, that's not always true.
And I
but
think
in this
that to their credit, they identify the gaps that are there that needs to be addressed, I think, in every chapter. So yeah, that works.
It's hard though.
Yeah, I know. We always want to go back.
Bob?
Kenny, that's actually a very good comment. And because I really wasn't looking forward to going back and reading those either.
You got him out.
Oh, thank goodness. No, but it brings up a good point because I'm going to use ecosystem strategies just as an example here. To me, there were glaring omissions there. For example, and Inga brought it up, I was really surprised that contaminants were not mentioned in that chapter, and yet they have such a pervasive effect on ecosystems and looking forward at all the emerging contaminants. I would have thought that would have been front and center in an ecosystem strategy to begin to consider that. And the same way with Virginia's comment about novel ecosystems, for whatever reason, that seems to be greatly ignored within the Delta, that people don't think about this and manage it as novel, evolving ecosystems in proactive ways to try and get in front of that. And so anyway, there were major topics like that were not even, as near as I can remember, were not even alluded to, under ecosystem strategies. And whether or not they do them, that's up to them. But to the writers, but they should at least point out the areas that are not going to be in their strategies, major areas that they're going to put aside for the moment. So anyway. Thank you for getting me out of having to go back and read. So, anyway, that's my comment.
Okay, thank you. Virginia.
And so those comments have clarified to me, I think it is our obligation to review something like this, because this is a document that purports to take the science and move it in a way forward so that it can be used by the people and the agencies. And if there are things that are missing in the document itself, not in the references, and we know about them, we can raise those. I think it's our job.
All right. So we seem to be in agreement to do a full review of the entire document. And I agree with Tanya. I mean, we will, I think, automatically focus on the chapters where our expertise lies. So to also minimize the effort that's needed. Is the deadline of December 20th for comments still feasible, do you think?
Before that, can you kind of mark everybody's comments like in 2 different topics, maybe for a particular for a particular chapter, it might be good to cover 3 aspects of this by everybody. What is good about this chapter, what's covered, and what is missing in this chapter, and how it could be improved. And if all those 3 points are covered for the chapter you review, that might help me to kind of integrate in a way that's useful for our review. Does that work?
That's a good idea. Yes. Yes.
I
Sorry,
think that's a good idea to ask those 3 questions. But I also think, because this is the way I always do reviews, is to say in this section on this line, why don't you mention this? Because that points them to, changes they could make if they choose to listen to us.
More specific
You
comments.
could fall
both
under
of
the
them.
3rd category of what
Okay.
everybody said. I think the
Okay.
3rd category of how you address them could be very specific. I mean, it could be
Okay.
typos if you wanted to go that route,
Mhm.
but it could be broader.
And I'd like to go back to Virginia's suggestion early on about, the conceptual figure. It seems like every chapter should have a conceptual figure. For example, under ecosystem strategies, what are the main drivers and processes that are occurring, within the Delta, and can you develop a conceptual figure that outlines this? Okay, all right, come on, Virginia, go ahead.
That would be marvelous. But if you do that, I'd really like to see it in the context of one figure for the whole thing, because to me, what I constantly see missing from this is how all the pieces fit together. I just don't have that in my mind. And so if you could have the readers of this document understand how the pieces fit together, that would be marvelous.
Well, I agree with that there should be a comprehensive figure, but I think in a way for each of the chapters that treat a subject, it would be nice to have a conceptual figure for that too, because there are so many topics, as you know, in ecology, we can go this wide, but you can really only realistically, pragmatically probably cover certain things. So to point out, here we're this wide, but we can do these things, we can adapt in these 2 or 3 or 4 avenues.
So one suggestion, just to follow up on this discussion, might be to have a sort of general comment section for the entire report where we could include this overall graphic that ties everything together, and any other general comments. And then we can have chapter specific comments along those 3 points that I raised. You know, so the general comments and
Structured
chapter
way, yeah.
specific comments.
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm sure that would be very helpful in bringing it all together.
Right.
I'm just thinking I love the idea of having this conceptual graphic. I think things like governance would have to go in a separate one, you know, I mean, stuff like that. So whatever makes sense. Yeah. Lisa.
Yeah, I'm going to sidestep the issue of the diagrams, but I do think one thing that's just occurring to me during this conversation is that the title is climate resilience, you know, adapting to climate. And I don't think they always connect their recommendations back to climate drivers. So perhaps that's one role, or I think they probably need to acknowledge that they've talked about a lot of changes to the systems that are probably a lot driven by climate, but also incorporate other changes that are happening. So it's possible they need to acknowledge that in some more specific way.
All right. Yeah. Now Kenny has his tag up and Edmund also. I'm not sure who was first, but oh, it's old. Edmund, did you want to say?
Oh yeah, I just want to go back to Obey. I didn't catch the 3rd point that you want every ISB member to review for each chapter, like what is good, what is missing. What was your 3rd?
3rd was more like recommendations
Oh,
as to how to improve it.
How to improve. Got it. Yes.
Yeah.
I guess I would have a 4th category about good things.
That's the first.
That was number 1. Yeah.
The good, the bad.
Number 1. Yeah. And how to improve it.
Okay. I missed that part.
Mhm.
So given the timeline, do we want to each volunteer for 1 or 2 chapters that we feel particularly sort of well placed to comment on? But then we would have maybe, I don't know, 2 or 3 people who would either prepare broader comments that are more at this meta level, like for example, the figures that Virginia was referring to, or I don't know.
Comments, please.
the conceptual
general comments
diagram,
section,
it's
yeah.
general comments, yeah.
Isn't it possible we'll all have general comments that emerge from our individual chapter reviews? So I mean, I don't think we have to assign that per se.
Yeah, I will integrate those general comments into one section, but if everybody can write for your specialty, those 3 responses, that will help me to provide chapter by chapter comments in our review, report.
Although to defend Anna's suggestion, now I'm going to argue both sides. There are some things like strategy development that are not expertise specific. So then the question becomes, do we want to give people, marching
Yeah.
orders on thinking strategically or
Yeah,
something?
I mean, I guess maybe another middle ground would be if some subset of us, for example, took on, let's say, summary, chapter 1 introduction, chapter 8 implementation roadmap, chapter 11 conclusions and next steps. Basically, the chapters that are more cross-cutting and have that be the main home for these broader comments. And then some others amongst us have take a deep dive into 1 or 2 of the other chapters. And from those, I agree that there could still be some general comments that emerge from those more chapter specific looks. But I do think that having some small number of people have more of a meta look at the report as a whole would be beneficial as well.
Well, I'm thinking, well, maybe we should decide now who wants to do what. So what you're saying is we should all go through chapter 1.
Well, so what I'm saying, but again, I'm completely flexible. What I'm saying is that as an example, let's just say that, for example, I volunteered to look at, I don't know, let's say chapter 5 and or chapter 7, let's say, for example, right? But some people, rather than picking a very discipline specific chapter, could instead take the meta chapters. And so those would be the exec summary, maybe chapter 1 and maybe chapter 8 and 11. So like all of the ones that cut across different scientific subdisciplines.
What do others think? How should we split this up? I was thinking that more general chapters could be commented on by everybody, and then certain people would take on individual other chapters that, you know, are within their expertise, or are within their field of expertise.
I think that works as well. I think I'm just cognizant of timeline. Speaking for myself, I'm at the AGU conference all of next week.
Okay.
And so, and then there's only 1 week left before the target. So thinking about my own time constraints, I don't think I could do both.
Yeah.
But others may have more slack in their calendar. For the
Well,
next
that
couple
goes
weeks.
back to my question. Do we think that December 20th
Yeah.
is still a realistic deadline for our comments?
Will it help to extend that to, let's say, first week of January? And then what's the drop dead date for review comments back to? Is it like end of January or sometime in February?
Yeah, we could extend that, you know, our comments deadline, I think.
So June,
Well, it depends in part on
January
when they're
s-
trying to get the report, the final report out. Right?
January 17 is the public comment.
Yeah, but we already established that we have more time. So
So
we could
January,
easily go to early January, I think.
right, for our comments,
Yeah,
first week of January, right? For our comments, chapter by chapter, or the general comments,
do I see people nod?
yeah.
Maybe we should set a date in the first week of January.
Yeah, and then for our comments to go back, overall, I think we need time to review our document among ourselves. And
Yeah.
maybe in the January meeting, I don't know, but
Yeah.
end of January, the draft of that document, and then sometime in mid-February, we can send it back to them.
Yeah, and I'm not sure if we really need to assign specific chapters. My main concern is that all the chapters will be covered.
Yeah.
You know,
So how
do we make
sure we are not missing
Yes.
in our review?
Yes.
Well,
Might be okay.
Yeah, I don't know that every chapter is the most important way to go. Like, so for example, as the economist, it'd be obvious for me to do the cost and benefits
Yes.
chapter, right?
yes,
But I have more strategic problems with how things are set up that I don't think make it worthwhile to nitpick the cost benefit and, the cost and benefit discussion. Because, so, I think to Anna's point, I think there could be some benefit of just, maybe more than one person, having someone to bounce some ideas off of and vet and make sure you're communicating well about, I think this is strategically what's missing here, might actually be something I would rather focus on.
so which
Yeah.
is what we did for the EIR at some point, right? Yeah. Okay.
So, oh, my mic was on the whole time. That's bad.
We heard you.
We didn't hear much.
Yeah,
No.
because I was, so we all read the entire document, because I think you have to be fair to the document. You can't just pick out a chapter and make comments. I can't just pick out a chapter and comment, but then focus on, and I think what we learned from the EIR was you need 2 people at least for a chapter. One person reading it stuff or reviewing it. So, 2 people. And my preference would be meso and macro comments, not micro comments. Because I don't think that, I think that dilutes our major comments when, and it's obviously been read by a lot of people already. So I think we stick with not only the 10,000 foot, but maybe like 2,500. But I don't think we need to get into the details of it. I don't think that's helpful for this kind of document. And then everyone, I think, should comment on certainly 1, 2, and 3 is the kind of the ones you had that were cross-cutting. 8. And what was it? There was one more, conclusions or governance, something. So maybe we can partition it that way, split it up. But I don't think Lisa likes something I said.
Well, we've gotten feedback in the past that they appreciate specificity and concreteness in our comments. So I just want to balance what you're saying with that feedback, that, you know, when we give them something that says, this paragraph doesn't make any sense, they appreciate that. So I what does meso look like to you? Is I think we should be more careful with that.
I think we absolutely probably stay away from wordsmithing. That's what I call micro.
Yeah.
But if
No commas.
yeah.
I'm looking at Virginia.
Semicolon or comma.
Yeah, that's right.
That is, if it's clear what they mean, that's sufficient, and then we comment on that. So your comment would be meso to me. Well, I made these up, so, as you know. But not like, you know, line 7, paragraph, line 7, which should be that, you know, as an extreme example, which, since and because, and we go through the whole list. So I think I don't think that's needed here. And that helps, I think. And if you're not sure, put it in, and you can, you know, we can always take it out, right? So
is there a desire to, I'm sorry.
I was just going to just add one little thing. So I would just say to round this out is we want to be concrete as possible about what it looks like to improve it while we're making these general comments is how I would crosswalk that.
So is there a desire to have identify 2 people for some key chapters today, or I mean, is it something, are they ready to volunteer is what I'm asking.
I was just going to tackle that, actually. I think we all need to clearly read the approaches, right? So that covers, I think, chapter 1, 2, and 3 to understand what was done. So who would be willing to provide comments on chapter 4, flood risk reduction strategies?
I could be on
Obi,
that one, yeah.
who else?
And then.
Wait, I think, and now, and yeah,
No?
well, you know, I would be the primary one for that one.
Okay,
So
we'll have-
somebody to
we
look
have
at my
one.
comment.
look at that one in the cost and benefit chapter, so.
Okay.
You want to?
Yeah.
Okay, you're second, Lisa. Okay, ecosystem strategies. Bob,
Bob,
I can do that too. Or Kenny? Okay. Agricultural strategies.
I can do that one. 2 of us.
Okay. Tanya, agricultural strategies, Tanya?
Sure, I can look at ag strategies.
Which one?
Ag,
Ag, yeah. Okay. Virginia. Tanya.
I've already written this stuff down.
Water supply reliability strategies.
I could be one of them.
Okay, you too. Mhm.
Not much left.
And then I'm not sure how many we want per chapter in the end, but I could also add my name to 5. Or 30.
Sorry, I didn't catch that.
I could also add my name to chapter 5. I just didn't know if we have.
We have 2 and myself. We have 3 people, but yeah, if you can manage.
Yeah, that's an important one.
2 is a minimum.
Yeah. And then the implementation roadmap. I think we might have to all look at that.
We also.
Yeah. And then cost benefits, that's clearly Lisa. Is there anybody else who will look at that? Tanya, I was
Tanya.
looking at you.
Yeah, Diane is. there.
Oh,
She's
Diane,
not there. I
okay.
guess she's not
No,
here.
not necessarily this one. but
Well,
I
she
think-
should do the flood instead of me.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Very quiet.
hang on.
She's not
She's
here.
not
I
there.
think. She's not here.
Yeah.
We can
Yeah.
assign her anything we want, right?
Oh.
Diane would be better for them.
Yeah, she's the wild card. Okay, so cost and benefits, I have Lisa and Tanya. And then governance, Tanya. Anybody else who will look at that?
I can be a second.
I can help with adaptive management, but, you know, that's.
Well,
kind
you
of
can
a-
both.
I
Okay,
can help
Lisa,
too.
Lisa and Kenny.
It's not really, we must have others.
I can do some of that,
Okay,
but Kenny comes with a different perspective, so I think it's good to have.
okay.
Yeah, that may
So we
help
have
with
four.
multiple people.
Yeah, that's
Yeah,
good.
that's an important one.
Yeah, okay.
Okay, and then conclusions, we all have to look at that. So we got it. Did you catch all that?
Do you want to add
Edmund?
Dan to a second one, or do you want to reserve for maybe for, again, I still think that if some people have a lighter load and can do a little bit more of that meta look, that would also be helpful.
Yeah, I'm thinking not.
I have
grouping
a very
everything on
light-
Obey, like for chapter 8, I think it would be good if there was a little bit of coming together of minds.
Right.
And not just dumping a bunch of random comments on Obey, right?
Yeah, I mean, I have to integrate all of yours besides looking at these chapters too, so it will help. I mean, it all depends on if we follow the structure we agreed on, it might be easier for me to integrate.
Yeah,
Yeah. it
yeah.
will.
That's true.
Yeah. But so Diane would be on chapter 4 as well, is that?
Yeah, we have to.
Yes,
Before.
we
Okay.
assigned her to that.
Volunteer.
Yeah. And we have
Okay.
I've got it all.
4 people on chapter
Very good.
5. 3
I
on
just highlighted
6.
me, what I have to do for my notes.
So does
Two-
anybody remember, one of the areas that is of concern to me has to do with functional flows. And well, functional flows and voluntary agreements, but functional flows in particular. I can't remember which chapter. I remember seeing it somewhere in here. I think I did. Does anybody remember what chapter that is?
Not in the ecosystem?
It's either force. Oh, yeah, it could be ecosystem.
Yeah, ecosystem.
Is it in ecosystems?
Yeah, well, it's in the executive summary, it's under that topic.
Okay. All right, then, all right, I'll take a look at that.
All right,
It's also under implementation roadmap.
wonderful. And we'll set a deadline for the first week in January. So great. Thank you all for stepping forward. It's great. I have to find my way here. So okay, so those are the next steps, and we will try to have a draft comment letter by the end of January. Does that sound
Hopefully,
feasible?
yeah, I think so. I have to remember what I need to do, we need to do for the climate workshop as well, but I think it's doable.
Yeah,
Yeah.
okay. All right, well, thank you all. Are there any public comments?
Yes, we have one from Deirdre Desjardins. Deirdre, you have the ability to unmute your microphone.
Yeah, I really appreciate the board taking the time to look into this. I did want to call your attention. The water supply reliability chapter includes reviewing and consider modifying water quality standards to develop climate-informed objectives for agricultural uses, fishing, recreational, tribal, and other human beneficial uses of water. And the Delta folks and myself, who were in the water supply reliability focus group, were very opposed to this. And I did point out to them that they were saying it was necessary because of the drought, the severe droughts we've seen over the last decade. And I did point out that there is new research that shows that we could flip to a wetter pattern, which would make it more feasible to meet these objectives. But I also feel because of the change in the federal administration, the Project 2025 indicates that the Trump administration is going to be one of the most extreme anti-environmental administrations in recent history. And so I really think it's worth looking at those with a thought about what might have unintended effects in making, because of these sociopolitical developments, what might have unintended effects in reducing ecosystem resilience and reducing the resilience of the Delta, at least if done over the next few years. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Deidre. All right. If nobody wants to respond, we move on to agenda item 6, which is a discussion on the Delta ISB member reappointment and recruitment. And that was supposed to be presented by Lisamarie, our lead scientist, who cannot be here today. So I'll provide the background of this, and we can then discuss what kind of expertise we would like to invite into the group, into the board. So 5 Delta ISB members will complete their first term on August 31st, 2025, and could be reappointed for a second term. That's Lisa Wanger, Diane McKnight, Tanya Heikela, Virginia Dale, and Bob Nyman. Per the Delta Reform Act, the council is responsible for appointing Delta ISB members. And as part of the process, the council asks the Delta lead scientist to provide a recommendation on who to appoint. If Delta ISB members do not want to seek a second term, the Delta lead scientist will need to recruit for new Delta ISB members. So far, we know that Virginia is not planning to serve a second term. And Tom Holzer has just sent his resignation letter, so we're losing 2 members for sure. I'm sorry. We would now like to have a discussion on what expertise to recruit for to fill upcoming vacancies, to help inform the lead scientist what to look for. So, I'd like to open the discussion on what you think, what expertise we need to replace the 2 members of the board that are leaving, and what would complement the rest of us. So,
Can I ask
please
a
shoot.
quick question about process? Just because I'm only 2 years in, and so I don't have full understanding it. At the end of the 5-year term, as long as members are obviously participating and wish to be reappointed, is it more or less a given that the council would reappoint them, or do either they or we as a board need to provide a formal justification for those members being reappointed?
I hand over to Edmund because I've only been on the board for the same amount of time.
Yeah, typically the reappointment process begins with the lead scientist. Once we know like the term is coming up, she'll have a discussion with the board members, the specific board member about their interest in serving a second term, and also using assessments based on what she's seen and has heard to help inform that recommendation. Historically, Delta ISB members who have sought a second term got a second term.
I do have a comment on like Tom leaving, which is pretty sad actually. But he had some unique skill sets that are useful for particularly subsidence, levy issues, and even maybe, seismic expert. So
Mhm.
it would be nice to replace, his skill set in the board, I would think.
It's more like the hydraulics rather than.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, so there's one thought, Lisa.
Well, I also point out he's a geologist with, understanding of seismicity. So I don't think, and that has come up quite a bit. So I don't think we should ignore that either.
It's definitely an important topic, yes, in the Delta. All the levees and all that. Virginia?
So I think also having a landscape ecologist is really valuable, but I have felt stymied by my lack of understanding of this system. And, just yesterday I gained so much more understanding. So having someone who comes in with some understanding of the system is really helpful, because it takes years to build that. Now you don't want anybody with conflict of interest also, so that
Right.
makes it really hard.
That's a trade-off. And of course, it's very nice to bring in perspectives from the outside as well, right?
Yeah. So, I mean, there are trade-offs there, but this is such a complex system.
It is large too.
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah.
Mhm.
And from a landscape perspective, to me, it's different from fish ecology, which is, forgive me, but more contained.
Mhm, mhm, mhm.
I said that wrong.
Any other thoughts? I mean, one way of going is, of course, to replace the two people that are sadly leaving us with the same kind of expertise. Anna?
I guess one more quick question about process, I think Tom stepping down is effective immediately.
Yes.
Would we be looking for two people at the same time, or would we do it in a staged way so that we would try to fill Tom's position more quickly? And with Virginia's position, we have the luxury of having until end of next summer is my.
I'm going by Lauren nodding or not nodding.
And then maybe I'll just I don't have to talk multiple times. I don't know how broad the sort of outer boundaries of what the ISB has covered in the past has been, but I wonder if someone who has more expertise on environmental justice types of issues, or incorporating Indigenous knowledge in adaptation and management planning, whether that is within or outside of the type of scope that the ISB would typically think of. But that's another area where I don't think we have any really substantive expertise on the board currently.
I do have one area that we don't seem to talk much is like what I call upstream and downstream. What happens in the tributary watersheds is effects of fires on the hydrology of the watershed and how it impacts Delta, and what happens downstream of us in terms of agricultural practices and looking at future conditions. So I don't know if that's a hydrologist or an engineer or hydrologist with background on this watershed hydrology. Because in the future, for example, if the fires are going to change the watershed responses, that might be, and then looking at these reservoirs, I think in the Delta Adapt, there's a talk of, do we need to look at the storage that's provided in the system? So,
given the importance of water quantity,
there's something I don't know, we may have some, distributed expertise in upstream and downstream, particularly agricultural practices, perhaps. So, water rights issues and all that. I don't know if those general categories, do we have enough expertise to provide input on that?
Tanya, did you have your hand up?
Yeah, thanks. I just wanted to reflect on the fact that I think all of us when we come onto the board, generally bring some sort of interdisciplinary experience too. And I think prioritizing that regardless of what kind of specialty our training or our, the majority of our research is in, can be really important. One thing I've really appreciated about Virginia as a landscape ecologist is she thinks about the people on the landscape. And so it's easy to, have those conversations about the social science interactions with her. And so just thinking about how we prioritize some of that interdisciplinary lens would be important. And then I also wanted to give a shout out to Anna for mentioning the opportunity to think about someone who comes in with traditional ecological knowledge. I think that could be really informative for this board, and it might be from different types of disciplines. There's certainly social scientists who study how traditional ecological knowledge is produced, but there are folks within Indigenous communities that are trained in traditional ecological knowledge that might bring some really valuable expertise in ecology or I don't know, other types of issues that might be of interest to us. So yeah, I think we should think broadly here and not constrain ourselves to necessarily replacing one person's expertise, because there's so many different ways that the combination of board members we have that we can develop that type of interdisciplinary expertise that's important.
Yeah, I mean, and I would like to remind people that, at least from my experience, I remember that that the call for applications is really open, right? So it will also depend on who the people are that actually want to be on the board. We can, I don't think it's ever been specified that in this area of expertise or that area of expertise, right? Edmund?
Typically we do have areas, like we provide like a range of expertise or interest that we're looking for in the recruitment flyer. But it's typically broad enough where we're not narrow, but sometimes we do have like a very narrow focus, like for Tom's vacant, like the position that Tom filled has always been the geology position. Okay. For that one, we were very specific about geology, but in the range of geology, there's like a range of things to look for.
All right, thanks for correcting that. Yeah. I think geology or whatever Tom represented would be a good expertise to have on the board again, right?
Well, I would extend that to hydrogeology, because sometimes we don't talk much about groundwater.
Yeah. Well, yeah.
Yeah, I was just going to add a little bit on the process question. So the flyer. So when there's a big group, like 5 of you all at once or 6, then it's by nature, the recruitment flyer was pretty broad because that was a lot of different categories. Mm-hmm. So when it's a smaller number, it sometimes is focused more, depending, but it's still, I think, open enough for, it's not really prescripted. Mm-hmm. But just to answer your question, we've learned there's some economy in recruiting for 2 rather than 1 at a time. This is quite an effort. You may not realize it, but it's quite an effort to do the recruitment and all the process related things. So if there's going to be 2, we'll put them together. And we won't do it. We won't fill Tom's first, but it doesn't mean that it's too early to start thinking about. And in fact, it's not too early at all to be thinking about replacing Virginia's position. So now is the time. So in some ways it was timely for Tom to let us know now.
Yeah.
So we could
take
that.
But from what I hear, we want similar areas of expertise that you 2 represented here, right? So
well, and you've had some feedback on some.
Maybe a little bit more hydrology oriented, but still watershed wide, kind of big picture type of things, and local and indigenous knowledge. Yeah. Oh, I'm sorry, Lisa. Yes, yes, of course.
So it's the conversation has wandered a lot from when I first put up my tent, but let's see if I can get this thought back. So I wanted to acknowledge that I think Virginia's landscape expertise is a really valuable perspective, not for anything so specific, but to remind us about the broader connectivity of things and the scale, the larger scale issues, instead of just focusing on this pond, this river, you know. So I appreciate that. And then I think there becomes a question of, you know, what other expertise beside landscape ecology, you know, that we look for in a person who might add that larger scale. Because you could have a landscape ecologist who focuses on other aspects of the system, hydrology, or, you know, things like that. So I think we could marry those two potentially.
Other ideas? No hands up, so maybe that's. I think except for the two that we just mentioned and discussed, everybody else, for the time being, at least, is back on board, and we are.
You don't
very
get to
happy
vote
about
me
that.
off the island.
We're very happy about that.
Yeah,
So
thank goodness
you.
it's only two.
Yeah. Okay, I think we're done with this agenda point at that point. Do we? And we're ready for lunch. Mhm.
Yeah, we have a public comment from Deirdre Desjardins.
Okay. Sorry, I forgot.
Just really briefly, people who were around for the defunding the Delta Independent Science Board issues. I did help organize defense of the Independent Science Board and outside agitation. The board, we are in a prolonged deficit cycle for California. So there is some risk when the contracts come up for renewal. Hopefully there won't be the same kind of problems there were before, but it's something to be conscious of as the state grapples with what looks like fairly extended years of budget deficits. That's all. And I'm very glad Lisa is staying as well. And we'll miss Tom. Thank you.
Thank you, Deirdre. We also hope that that's not going to get in our way. Yeah. Okay, I get thumbs up here, so don't worry too much. Well, with that, we are ready for lunch. So are we still taking a 1.5 hour lunch starting now? Okay. That's right. We have an external speaker next on our agenda. So we will start back up at 1:30 then.
Okay,
Yeah.
can we move up item 8, which is a internal discussion,
We could.
and do it before lunch?
Yes.
Sure.
Yes, we could. So let's do that. Yeah.
I'm a sucker for efficiency.
All right. Well, we'll then move to agenda item 8. Get that done before lunch, which is a discussion on the review of the draft tribal and environmental justice issue paper. And just to provide some background, the Delta Stewardship Council has released the public review draft of its tribal and environmental justice issue paper. The draft presents the council's understanding of tribal and environmental justice issues in and around the Delta and recommends actions to better address those issues within the scope of the council's mission authority and influence. The council staff presented the draft report to us at our October in-person meeting. Based on the discussion at that meeting, we agreed that we would like to submit a comment letter on the draft issue paper. And Drs. Heikela and Wanger prepared a draft comment letter for us to discuss at the November meeting and revise the comment letter based on the discussion. So based on our discussion today, we hope to finalize it and submit the final letter to the Delta Stewardship Council. I will turn over to Tanya. Tanya is still there, yes, to provide an overview of the changes made since the last meeting.
Sure. Thanks, Inga. Are we going to share a copy of the document or for folks to see?
Yeah, I'm moving it up right now.
Okay, thanks, Edmund. So yeah, we revised the document based on feedback that we got at the previous meeting, and specifically some of the comments from Bob about bringing in some more holistic recommendations for the report to make sure that details on possible strategies for the future role of the council in moving this type of initiative forward could be added to the report or fleshed out in with more specificity. So Bob provided us some really good language at the very beginning of that report that's in this section that you're seeing on the screen under overarching concerns and recommendations. And we brought those in. There was another concern that we elevated up to this section related to the combining of kind of tribal justice and environmental justice issues, and just the need to make sure that there's clarity in how those two issues are defined. And then the rest of the changes throughout the comment letter were minor. We added a couple more comments on the executive summary about revising the recommendations to include more actionable next steps and criteria for evaluation and accountability. And then in section 2, we suggested that if the report is proposing a kind of proactive initiative on tribal and environmental justice issues, that the Stewardship Council and other agencies, then more attention to those strategies and timelines for moving it forward would be needed in that section. So that's kind of repeating one of the things we had in the opening section, but yeah. And then the rest of the comments, I think we're just adding, we were flagging which comments were more minor versus more major. In section 6, we added a couple points on the ways forward again, kind of sticking with that main theme of really thinking more carefully about what are those actionable steps that could help in the implementation of such a plan. So I think that covers any of the edits we made. I don't know if Bob or Lisa want to chime in, but.
Thank you, Tanya. That was a really nice summary of the changes. And I think I just want to reemphasize something you said. I think, Bob's comments helped us realize that the document had appeared to have one structure of being a background document, but also generated a bunch of recommendations. And so the two things really were a little bit at odds in terms of carrying them all the way through the report. And so I think that was a key, realization we had from Bob's comments of, well, if you're going to have recommendations, does that mean you're actually setting yourself up for actions? And so I think that's really a lot of what we changed, was to recognize that they had expanded beyond just a background document.
Yeah, thanks, Lisa.
Well, thank you, Tanya and Lisa, for giving us that overview. Obi?
Yeah, I just have I think I was pleased to see the integration of Bob comments into this document. and providing some recommendation. One thing that struck me, for example, under overarching concerns and recommendations, the first sentence says primary goal of the issue paper was unclear, very simple. But when you look at like paragraph number 2 about it, it kind of provides this, sort of a complementary, observations of this report, how it's useful and what it covers. I was wondering if there is any concern about that one sentence under overarching recommendations or concerns and recommendation. I'm just throwing this out. Is that at odds with the rest of the compliments that are in the report? Otherwise, it looks great.
Okay, why did you say that?
Well, I could answer. Tanya, do you want to take the first cut?
Go, Lisa, go for it, because I think it relates to what you just said, and maybe you can restate it.
It does relate to what it just said, though. I just said, so yeah, so if you look at the title of the paper, they don't really say, we're about to give you a bunch of recommendations and a plan of action, right? The title and a lot of the setup, but then they do. So because we don't know really what the intent is or what the right way to fix this is, we did it more of an if-then statement. So to me, it's compatible, but if you have an alternative suggestion of wording you think would clarify, we could be happy to consider it.
Yeah, that's exactly what I would have said.
I'm happy with that explanation. It's kind of struck me that short sentence. Maybe you have to read the rest of that paragraph to understand what it says. Right?
Yeah. Kenny?
Yeah, I had a similar thought that, do you mean concerns or overarching comments? Concerns really is a serious term, right? And then you go into major comments and minor comments. So I thought it was overarching comments and recommendations. And I don't know if that really matters, but I know concerns attract people's attention. So if that was the point, then okay.
We may be using the word concerns too loosely there. I think comments would be a fine substitution. I don't have
Okay.
a problem with that.
Otherwise, great.
Mhm. Any other comments? Yeah, I thought it made it much more concrete with the changes. And you're really requesting concrete steps forward, right? So, I mean, that was the whole point. Yeah. So are we ready to vote on this? Do we have a motion to have Lisa and Tanya revise, do the minor revisions that you just discussed and submit the final letter to the Delta Stewardship Council? Oh, Virginia?
Move that we take the minor suggestions discussed here and continue forward with the letter.
All right.
I second.
You second, thank you. Okay, roll call. Virginia?
Yes.
Yes.
Oh, Inga, just for purposes, you just have to ask, are there public comments?
Oh, are there public comments? I'm sorry.
No worries. There are no public comments.
I have too many highlighted sections here.
Everything's highlighted.
Okay, so Virginia voted yes. Tanya?
Yes.
Yes. Anna?
Yes.
Diane is no longer with us. Bob?
Yes.
Obi?
Yes.
Kenny?
Yes.
Lisa?
Yes.
I see yes too, so the motion passes. Okay, so I'd say thank you very much. Have this off the agenda and we can now go to lunch. And we will reconvene at 1:30 for the presentation by Mr. Schwarz, Dr. Schwarz. Are we ready? All right. Well, welcome back to the meeting of the Delta Independent Science Board. I welcome Andrew Schwarz. Thank you for being here today. He's going to give us a presentation on the State Water Project Delivery Capability Report. It's a mouthful. Andrew Schwarz is with the California Department of Water Resources. He will provide an overview of the final State Water Project Delivery Capability Report for 2023, which was released in July 2024. The report is used extensively by state water project contractors and others to plan their water uses, such as integrated regional water management board plans. This year's report included major changes to the data and methods used to model changing conditions as a result of climate change. These changes were made in response to recommendations from the Delta ISB's 2022 Water Supply Reliability Estimation Review. As a reminder, the Delta ISB's Water Supply Reliability Estimation Review recommended that estimation methods should be updated to reflect accumulated and expected climate change effects and combined with uncertainty analysis. So I'll give the word to Andrew.
Well, thank you. Thanks for having me back, and it's a pleasure to be with you today. Next slide. So I'll actually be talking about mostly about the State Water Project Delivery Capability Report, but I've also included a couple of slides in here about kind of our follow-on effort on what we're doing about the findings of what we found in the Delivery Capability Report. So just as some background, the report is a part of the Monterey Plus Settlement Agreement. It's an agreement with our State Water Project contractors to provide this information. We do this biannually, so every other year, and we report on the existing delivery capability of the project. So how much water we believe that we are able to deliver on a regular basis and within dry conditions and wet conditions. And then in 2007, at the request of the contractors, we added a future outlook 20 years into the future. And this is a kind of a business as usual plus climate change outlook that is included in the report. So that's been included since 2007. And then I'll talk about what's new for this year. Next slide, please. So as Dr. Werner said in the introduction, the DCR serves as a key planning source of information for all SWP water users throughout the state. It finds its way into sustainable groundwater management plans, urban water management plans, ag plans, IRWMs, integrated resource plans. So this is a key piece of information that is used throughout the state, and that's why we really targeted this report as a place to improve where we're providing climate change information. Next slide. Next slide, please. So it also actually turns out to be the default planning scenario for most of our SWP internal planning as well. So for future energy resource planning, as we plan for asset maintenance and management, in our environmental impact reports and various other long-range operation studies, the scenarios of future climate that we use internally come from this report, and that's how we make things consistent across all of the different planning activities that we're doing. Again, another reason why it was so important to attack this plan as the place to improve our climate change information. Next slide. So we've made a number of enhancements for this 2023 document. The first one, and I think maybe the most important, is to account for climate changes that have already occurred. So we know that climate change is happening. You know, we're already a degree or two warmer here in California. We have seen changes to our precipitation signal that are hard to attribute exactly to climate change or to cyclical variability, but we know things are changing. And heretofore, it's mostly, climate change has mostly been looked at as something that happens in the future. This is the first report to say, no, this is already happening. The world is already warmer. Our precipitation signals are changing, and we need to include that in our assessment of where we are today. The second improvement is we've added new risk-informed climate change scenarios. So in the past, I noted that we've been including climate change information since 2007, but in all of those previous reports, we've included one scenario out into the future that said, this is how much water the SWP can provide 20 years into the future. And of course, we know that we can't say with any level of confidence exactly how much water we'll be able to provide or what climate change is going to bring us. And so it's really important for us to be more transparent about the risks and uncertainties with those futures. And we've tried to do that in this report, but do it in a way that is the most usable for our state water project contractors and those folks who depend on state water project water supplies and how they do their planning. We've subjected both of these new improvements to independent peer review through the Delta Science program. So we thank you all for that. And I believe I spoke to you all actually a few months ago when you had a panel on the science program's peer review purpose and talked about these studies and how much we appreciated the review provided for that. And then the final thing that we've been doing is really greater alignment with all the activities across DWR on how we treat climate change, how we model climate change, and how we communicate to that to the public, so that we're really speaking across the department with one message. And so you will see this in the California Water Plan, the upcoming Central Valley Flood Protection Plan, and then future versions of the Delivery Capability Report, that all of our climate change information is really aligned across all of our planning studies. Next slide. Okay, so I talked about how we have now incorporated climate change into the current assessment of what the delivery of the State Water Project delivery capability. So what this includes is more variability in year-to-year runoff, more seasonal variability. So what we're seeing is a later onset of winter, not getting as much rain in October and November. Then higher winter flows as we see warmer storm events throughout the winter, bringing more direct runoff, less snow accumulation, and earlier runoff or earlier melt out of that snow. And then the other side of that coin is lower spring flows as we've got less snow to supplement that runoff. And what we found overall, you can see in this figure here to the right, from the 2021 DCR baseline to the 2023 DCR baseline, about a 2% loss of the long-term average annual allocation, or as a volumetric change, about 3.5% of a loss that we're already seeing as a result of climate changes that have already occurred. Next slide. That is in SWP deliveries, correct. So the second improvement is these new risk-informed future climate scenarios. So these scenarios are future conditions that evaluate combinations of climate changes. So we know that it's not just one thing that changes with climate, right? It's temperature, we see changes in precipitation behavior, and of course, sea level rise. And all of these things have different levels of risk, and you can think of each of these as having a distribution of potential outcomes, right? So if you could advance. And so what we've done is we've developed what we call a level of concern approach. So this is kind of a term of art to distinguish it from a true probability of the future, because we know there's so much uncertainty and different ways to different uncertainties that we can't totally quantify, but to the extent that we can, we establish a percent number that describes the percent of model-informed climate outcomes that would result in better system performance. So that's a lot of words, but there's a little animation here that'll help, or a couple of slides and animations here that hopefully will help with that. So you can keep advancing. So you can think of each of these temperature, precipitation change, and sea level rise as having its own uncertainty and distribution, right? I've assigned just a simple bell curve, a normal distribution to each of these. And we can select, keep advancing, from each of these distributions to form a single scenario of the future. And we've actually created 3 scenarios of the future. And so you can see this green one, or the what we'll call the 50th percentile level of concern scenario, is really selecting from the most likely outcome for each of these distributions and creating a scenario that is based on kind of the most likely outcome for each. And then we also have 2 more scenarios, a kind of 75th percentile level of concern, in which 75% of the model-informed outcomes would be better, and a 95th percentile outcome, where you can see that selecting from really the tail end, or the last the edge of the distribution for all 3, but it is not the 95th percentile for each of the 3, because of course the joint probability of 3 95th percentile outcomes is much worse than 95th percentile. So this is we've developed an approach that allows us to really pick the 95th percentile outcome across all of these joint probabilities. And that's described in a much longer report that's published actually on the Delta Science Program's website. Next slide. One key thing to understand is that these are not based on any single projection from a GCM, but rather on the ensemble of over 100 Loca-2 downscale GCM projections. So, so this really is a combination of different factors. Next slide. So another way to think about this is we're here at the present. We have our current conditions adjusted for climate changes that have already occurred. And we're looking out at the future, and we have this, this cone of uncertainty, right? And the further out we look, the wider that uncertainty range gets. And for 2043, 20 years into the future, we have this wide circle of plausible outcomes. And you can imagine an axis along that circle that describes the less challenging outcomes at the bottom to the more challenging outcomes at the top. So if we get a future that is cooler, wetter, and not that much sea level rise, that would be less challenging for the system. Not cooler, but less warm, I should say. And maybe wetter, because that is in the range of plausible outcomes from the models, that we could get a wetter future and less sea level rise. That would be less challenging for the system. Whereas if we get a future that is very hot, drier, much more variable, and high sea level rise, that is the worst outcome for our system, right? That is much more challenging. And so we've chosen scenarios along this axis to describe outcomes and to give us a tractable range of scenarios to plan from that kind of explore these potential outcomes. Next slide. So the first scenario is the 50th percentile, or in the next slide. There you go. Next is really the center of this plausible range. That's the 50th percentile level of concern. And looking just at the statistics of that scenario, it's about 1.5 degrees centigrade warmer. It's actually 1.5% wetter on average, but the precipitation arrives in 11% more intense. So basically, this is Clausius-Clapeyron scaling. In effect, as the 99th percentile and above precipitation events get 11% worse, and that extra precipitation kind of comes out of the rest of the distribution. And so the rest of the events get that much drier because you have that extreme, the precipitation arriving in those extreme events, and then 6 inches of sea level rise. Next slide.
Can I ask a quick clarifying question?
Sure.
are those changes relative to 2024 or relative to historical?
Relative to 2023, yeah, to the current conditions, yes. So a 75th percentile gets a bit warmer, 1.7 degrees warmer. No change in average precipitation, basically 12% more intense precipitation, and about a foot of additional sea level rise. Next slide. And then the third scenario, warmer still at almost 2 degrees Celsius warmer, almost 2% drier, 13% more intense on the precipitation side, and again, a foot of sea level rise. So those are the three scenarios that we've provided. You'll see that there is nothing below the 50th percentile that we've provided. We have not provided a more optimistic than the central tendency look, because we just don't think that that's an effective place to plan for. We think that planning for the middle to worst conditions is really where folks should be thinking about and addressing their concerns. We've recommended that folks look at all three of these scenarios, but at least two, to really understand the sensitivity of their decisions to these potential uncertainties in the outcomes of climate change. Next slide. So here's where this looks and what this looks like in terms of average annual state water project table A deliveries. So table A is just our contract nomenclature for the main deliveries that we provide to our customers. These are all climate change with no adaptation. So a future that assumes that climate change continues to occur and we make no adaptation decisions, and regulations and operations stay largely the same. So you can see at that 50th percentile level of concern, there's about a 13% decline. And by the time we get to that 95th percentile level of concern, there is a 23% decline in average annual deliveries. If we were to look at this in terms of dry years, the dry years actually get worse than the average, more severe declines. But in order, just to simplistically display this, these are still pretty significant declines. We'll say that the 95th percentile is not the worst case scenario. We should never refer to it that way because, of course, there's always something worse. And in this case, there are actually 5% of the distribution that is worse for the state water project in terms of potential outcomes. But this is a pretty severe outcome. Next slide. So this just shows how we have communicated the loss of delivery capability over the years. So each one of these dots represents a previous delivery capability report and the numbers that were reported in these previous reports. So you can see starting in 2011, how the blue line is what we've said is existing conditions. So of course that's a moving window. That was the existing conditions in 2011, and in 2013, 2015. And you can see starting in 2017, a pretty significant decline in the existing delivery capability of the project. And then a corresponding decline in future probabilities. And then you can see in the latest 2023 where it distributes into those three different scenarios of the future. Next slide. It's important to note that previous declines in that blue line, that existing delivery capability, were really mostly regulatory driven. So these were changes in regulations that we operate to that had a cost to water deliveries. That wasn't climate change. We weren't accounting for the changes in climate that had occurred. That was just regulatory declines. Next slide. But this most recent decline, the regulations really haven't changed since 2021, but we've incorporated this climate change loss. And so that's that 3.5% there. And then below that, that's all climate change driven out to, in the future 2043 projections. That's the only difference between the current conditions And the future conditions is the climate change, not any regulatory or any other change. Next slide. All right, so that paints a fairly dire picture of the future of the state water project and concern over the water we can deliver. But I think we want to always say that we can change and we can keep up with climate change. And so we're already developing several significant projects that would provide climate adaptation and resilience. And so we have this climate adaptation plan that we plan to release later, next year, that will evaluate all the current strategies that we're currently working on, both alone and then in combination, to show how they can work together. Next slide. So the key benefits of this adaptation study will be, it will really build on top of the DCR work. So it'll show how these alternative futures look with improvements in place by 2045. And then it'll also look further into the future out to 2085, which is the end of the current water supply contract, with and without adaptation. It'll show how combinations of projects can be more than the sum of their parts, and show how the SWP is preparing for a hotter and more extreme future. Next slide. So this is just a list of the current SWP adaptation strategies that will be described in this report. So you can see it's quite a long list, including structural measures that require actual construction and large investments in infrastructure, operational and management changes that we can make without actually modifying the infrastructure, but just changing the way we operate. And then finally, nature-based solutions that really focus on managing the environment in different ways and investing in things like Feather River watershed management, forest management up in the watershed that can provide benefits as well. Next slide. We focused on 5 of these that are our key adaptation strategies: Delta conveyance, California aqueduct subsidence, remediation, increased south of Delta storage, forecast-informed reservoir operations at Oroville, and enhanced asset management of our facilities as key strategies that we can model and quantify how those would provide measurable benefits to us. And so those will be the 5 that we will actually be modeling quantitatively in the study. The rest will be described and addressed qualitatively. Next slide. So just a few key takeaways and I'll finish up, and then hopefully have time for questions. Is if we don't act, that changes in snow accumulation, precipitation, temperature, and sea level rise will reduce deliveries. Average SWP deliveries by 2043 will decrease by greater than 10% in all likelihood. And drying critical year SWP deliveries would decrease by greater than 20% in all likelihood. That doesn't mean really that there isn't water. It's actually more or less about the same amount of water. It's just that our current infrastructure really wasn't designed for these conditions and to operate in a 21st century climate, and we can adapt. Next slide. And so that's where the adaptation plan will really be key, because it will show how adaptation can lead to alternative futures that mitigate these impacts, how multiple adaptation strategies work together. It's often been said that there's no silver bullet to respond to climate change, that it's going to take silver buckshot or a lot of different strategies, and that's really true here. These adaptation strategies often really respond to 1 or 2 different aspects of changing hydrology or sea level rise, and we're going to need multiple different ways to address these multiple different changes that we're seeing. And we fully expect to see that there'll be residual vulnerabilities, even if we were to implement all of these adaptation strategies. And we will need to be continuously planning and adapting and investing in the State Water Project to address climate change as it unfolds and as we learn more and more about what the future has in store for us. Next slide. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Andrew. That was very interesting. elucidating. So I'd like to open up the floor for questions.
You know, I always have one. So you actually hit upon one of my key questions in your last slide, or your second to last slide. You said it's not that big a change in water, but we see these dramatic changes in deliveries. Like, what are the key assumptions there? Like, are you just having a lot of so-called wasted water under these scenarios? How did you get there?
Well, I wouldn't say it's wasted, but we do see that the water comes in these larger gulps, if you will, these larger tranches of water, where our infrastructure just is not set up like we saw in 2023. There was lots and lots of water, and at some point, you know, everything is full and we can't export. There would have been, but there was water enough to export more water without impacting species and without violating any regulations. And yet there was no place to put it. There wasn't capacity to export it under those conditions. And we see that, and that's a very extreme example, but we see that over and over again, even in very short bursts within a dry period where we don't have the infrastructure to export it and store it during those periods where it's available, and we could be exporting it without having negative impacts on species or the Delta. And so this is really about looking at different ways to slow the water down, you know, export it when it's available without impacting species, store it for later, either south of the Delta or in other places, so that we can get through these increasingly lengthy and more severe dry times.
Yeah, so I mean, I get that we have a recent analog that helps us understand how this happens, but what, I mean, I'm not so familiar with the Local 2 downscaling, so I imagine some of it may be embedded in that data set, but you know, how do you know the storms are going to be back to back? How do you know? I mean, are you, because there's so many things we don't know about the precipitation patterns, and I'm wondering if you're making some key assumptions that make it look worse, is what I'm really getting at here, or whether these are very reasonable assumptions.
So that's an excellent question. So basically what we're doing is we're taking the historical record of observed hydrology and we are warming it up. And those statistics I put on the slide of like 1.8 degrees warmer and 1.8% drier. Those are actually fed into a statistical weather generator, which this is published and peer reviewed, but it has some physics in it, but it basically recreates that historical meteorology with the warmer weather and with a 7% Clausius-Clapeyron scaling. And so the precipitation gets scaled as well. So you see the same events over the same areas distributed over the state in the same general way as it has been historically. We are not yet including additional stochasticity, stochasticity or variability or a change in the frequency of events. That's the next step, and that's probably that is the next frontier that we're working on now. And so it really is, it's just a repeat of historical hydrology, essentially, with this more extreme climate change signal on top of it.
Obi?
Yeah, there's a lot of stuff in here that I need to read the report, but I have a couple of questions, you know, one on the modeling and one maybe on the adaptation strategy. So on the modeling side, and I think you addressed some of our EIR comments on using the historical hydrology, not being able to reproduce potential mega droughts or higher frequency and magnitude of mega droughts, and we identified that as a major issue. I'm glad to hear that that's being addressed. So the endpoints there are multiple trajectories to get to those endpoints, probably. Let's say there could be a very long mega drought in between and a very wet period and might get to the same. And I was wondering in those, question is, the modeling, does it account for those multiple trajectories in computing those statistics, those three endpoints? And the closest Clapeyron assumption is probably reasonable because you're working daily or higher, but for short events, there could be a super CC type behavior as well. So the modeling, does it account for those different trajectories along the way from multiple droughts that, or mega droughts that might be longer and more severe that might prevent you from honoring the water rights or contracts, right? So the second part I will ask at the same time on the supply and demand, you have on the supply side, you have southern storage increase, and I assume it's only the St. Louis, maybe. I don't know what reservoir. Or what we saw in the modeling for ER was that reservoir didn't have space when you had the water from the north, and I assume that was accounted for in the modeling. And I was wondering if there is any discussion as to northern reservoirs now that you're going to have all this runoff coming in sooner than later due to snow being coming in as rain, and that might trigger a lot of flood control releases that could probably threaten the levees as well, perhaps. I was wondering if all that factored into a 20-25-year time horizon that you're looking at. I don't know, it might be too much to ask, but
let me try and hit as many of them as I can. So in terms of trajectories, so each one of these scenarios is 100-year simulation. It's the historical 100 years warmed up every one of those years. So we don't really think about it as a trajectory to get there, but rather we think about it more once we get to 2043, a range of different types of years, hydrologic years that we might see, in the same way that we're still waiting to see how 2024, 25 plays out, right? It could be a wet year, it could be a dry year, it could be both at the same time. And so we have 100 years of observed hydrology that we still think is the best basis upon which to plan, because the models don't seem to be able to fully represent the hydrologic variability that we have seen historically. And so we like to map what they show us big picture onto that historical. And so we take the 100-year hydrology as kind of the envelope of different year types that we may see. In terms of south of Delta storage, what we're modeling there is an additional 2 million acre feet of storage south of the Delta that could be surface water or groundwater storage. And 2 million is a very large number. But basically we intentionally chose a very large number to say, what is the magnitude of the bowl that we might be able to fill if we had it, right? If it's essentially saying, if we had unlimited demand for storage, how often could we fill that storage up? And then you can use that information to try and say, okay, well, actually, the first 100,000 acre feet we could fill fairly frequently. Really above 1 million acre feet, maybe that's not super necessary, except in, we might only be able to fill that once every 10 years or something. Would that be worth building? And so this is really exploratory at this point, and would need a lot more, study. We're not moving forward on anything specifically on this. We're just really exploring it at this point. But we think it is an attractive option to kind of look at this. We have not at this point included any north of Delta storage largely because that has been studied quite significantly through CalFed and a number of different other avenues. And we already have, Sites Reservoir moving forward through the Water Storage Investment Program. And that's not an SWP project per se, that is the JPA. So that's a little bit different.
Right. But one follow-up real quickly. The demand side, the demand management.
Yeah.
I assume you're going to honor the full contracts between now and 2043, although the climate might change. Is there any opportunity to work with the contracts that might be, depending on the climate, maybe cutbacks on those? And is that an option?
Well, I mean, what the contracts say is that we'll deliver the water that is available, and that can be moved, after we've met regulations and all of our other commitments. And that's still what we would intend to do, and that's what the delivery capability report is showing, that if we don't do any adaptations, our ability to deliver Table A would decrease with climate change.
All right, thanks.
I guess I have a question largely out of curiosity. As you're fully aware, there's this great tension between water flows and, water demands and environmental demands for water. And from the environmental side, the ecological side, water is everything almost. It's the timing, the amounts, and the temperature, just everything about it. And my curiosity is really around, thinking about the future and in your planning and so forth. How do the environmental considerations play into your planning in terms of delivery and building infrastructure and so forth? Because once you take the water out of the system, it reduces the overall productivity, the carrying capacity, everything ecological, shifts in response to that. So how much does the environmental considerations play into the planning?
I mean, I would say they're primary. They are the first consideration. So every model that we run assumes that we meet our environmental requirements, the requirements of D1641 of our long-term operating agreements, of our endangered species permits. We meet those requirements first before we would export any water from the Delta. That's the pecking order, is that the environment gets first, and then what's left over we can export.
Okay, well, that's good. Makes me wonder about all the restoration activities that are going on in the Delta, where they say over, the next number of years between now and 2050, they're going to restore, 40,000 or 80,000 acres, which also, require water on a regular basis and so on. And I don't know what percentage of the total runoff, would be required for that. But how do those play in when you think about, on the environmental side, they're pushing in this direction. On the water delivery side, you seem to be pushing in this direction with your models. How much collaboration is there between these two sides? Because they both seem to have very different visions of the Delta in the future.
I don't know if it's a competing vision. I mean, I think these are two pieces of an important puzzle, right? All of these species, they need water, but they also need habitat. And if they've got no habitat, no amount of water is going to help these species survive. And if they've got tons of habitat, they're going to need some water, water as well. So I think these things are moving together in tandem to make sure that these species have more habitat in the future. That we're improving the habitat that's there, expanding what is there, making sure that these habitats are going to be there, you know, even as sea level rise expands and you know, changes where the tidal zone is, and that there's water to keep those areas wet and to inundate those floodplains. We know that's super important. Getting more water into the floodplains at certain times of the year. So I think these things are moving in tandem, and we see that as you know, two parts of the same picture.
So really, I guess that maybe is my point, is it seems like they're moving as two parts of the same picture, but there's only a finite amount of water. And how much cooperation and communication is occurring? Because it seems like they're going in almost parallel paths or slightly, you know, deviating. How much cooperation and communication is occurring so that your models are a lot more realistic and their expectations are a lot more realistic, as opposed to groups going off on, you know, on their separate paths?
I mean, I think there's a lot of collaboration. We're using the same models, the same, most of the same assumptions, all of the assumptions and modeling that we're using. We're trying to bring in the latest assumptions from the voluntary agreements and the long-term operating agreement that we're working on with the Bureau. So all of that is you know, moving in tandem.
Okay. All right. Well, good. Well, thank you.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, that actually kind of matches to what I was going to ask you, because earlier today we discussed the Delta Stewardship Council's Water Adapt, I'm sorry, is that Delta Adapts plan, right? Climate Adaptation Plan. And you were talking about developing an adaptation plan. So I was just wondering, I don't know if this fits together, but are you at all, you know, kind of working together so that this is two pieces of the same puzzle, or?
I have been involved with Delta Adapts and working with the team on that. But I think the timing is a little bit, I mean, obviously our plan is not out yet. And so we haven't been able to.
But I mean, would you be looking at the Delta Adapts and see if there are commonalities?
Definitely.
Yeah.
And we've been working with them and their recommendations to make sure that it's consistent with where we're going as well.
Great. Yeah. Great. That kind of matches what Bob was asking. Are you all going off into?
There is a lot. Yeah. You know, there is a lot going on. In a lot of different spheres, and I will tell you that is the director's, I would say, number one message to us is, you know, alignment and collaboration, and we need to be working together and bringing all of these things together. So we're working really hard as well as we can, and it's not always easy because there's different timelines and people are going in different directions, but we're doing, I think we're working together as closely as we can, and we have been working closely with the Stewardship Council team. And that report just came out last week. I haven't gotten all the way through it yet, but we did work with them on, you know, throughout the process on the development of that as well. So,
sounds great.
Yeah.
Thank you. Any more questions from the board?
Yeah, follow up on that earlier issue about the north of Delta storage. I thought Delta Adapt had that recommendation. I was wondering, so is that something you're going to, besides the sites reservoir or whatever, we haven't looked at that, but I don't know what storage that it has. So there's no other option to modify the federal facilities to expect, you know, more runoff, timing of runoff, for example, or even the operations. Is there any program to do that?
I can't speak to the federal facilities.
Yeah.
we're certainly looking at Oroville in
Yeah.
terms of forecast informed reservoir operations and a water control manual update there. We're working closely with the federal agencies on that to get that done. And that's one of the key strategies that we're looking at for adaptation, but I can't speak to Shasta or the Folsom.
And the water conservation strategies are built into the simulations, like.
So, what we assume is, in our simulation is that there will be 100% demand for whatever water we can supply. So we fully expect that our water contractors will continue to work on water conservation and efficiency within their service areas. And I think most of them have done a tremendous job in the past.
Right.
And will continue to do that in the future, but that won't negate the fact that they will still need water supply in the
Right.
future.
Okay. I think.
So basically, the simulations used present day Delta with present day water quality requirements and projected with the Delta method what climate change would do to the inputs of water. So it assumed no increase in population.
Well, because our, the State Water Project is a wholesale water provider, we have contractual limitations on the water that we provide and hydrologic limitations, frankly, that are more severe. We assumed that all the water that we would deliver, we could deliver would be taken up to kind of historical level. So there's table A.
Right.
We wouldn't deliver more than that. And then there is, in certain year types, there's Article 21, which is additional water when it's available, intermittent, interruptible supplies. Certain contractors can take that and put it into storage, but even that we saw in 2023, the demand for that can be limited.
But complying with the BIOPS
Yes.
is built in
Yes.
to the
100%,
operations
yes.
of salinity and or whatever.
Yep.
Well, not whatever, salinity. Okay. No, I just wanted to make sure I understood that, and it makes sense. But there are people who are somewhat bothered with perturbing the historical hydrology for the future, right? In terms of, as you well know, changing event patterns and stuff. Then you always say, well, how do you do that? And they begin to shrug a bit. So, and we've had that with CalSim as well. The same discussion.
Yeah.
About the future. It's present day with historical hydrology extrapolated to future. Thanks.
Yeah, I mean, we need to be able to look at hydrology sequences that are not just the historical over and over again perturbed, right? And we're working on that. We have tools that we're getting closer to being able to use for that, that we can, answer a lot more of these questions. But I still think that those historical 100 years are still gonna be a foundation. We should also have, let's say, 900 more years of exploratory that we can play with. But it's a challenge, and we're working on a lot of different fronts to advance that. It's a priority. We hear it loud and clear.
Can I ask a follow-up question, Bob, first? Anna too. You said, okay, this is the amount of water that you can provide that is coming from the rivers, available, in the storage system. What about those water rights? I'm plead ignorance here, please. So I heard that, people in the north have water rights, and if they don't use their water, they can sell it south. Is that what you referred to when you said an additional water that as it becomes available, or what did you mean by that?
No, so there, so mostly what we're modeling is, yes, there are in-basin demands for water north of the Delta based on water rights, and that's kind of, and then meeting environmental regulations and flow requirements and temperature and all of those things. Those are kind of taken off the top first.
Mhm.
And then if there's water left over, if there's still water in the system, that's what we would model exporting.
Yeah, I realize that.
In terms of water transfers, I don't think we model that exactly because we just don't know what the market would be for that, and that would happen kind of post.
But that's in this, you said something about and additional, I can't remember the exact words you said, but I was wondering what those additional deliveries were.
Oh, Article 21.
I don't
So
know
Article
what that-
21 is like in 2023, right? We had 100% allocation here.
Mhm.
So that means that we delivered 100% of the amount of water that is in each contractor's table A allotment. So each contractor pays for a certain amount of maximum water supply. They got that. And then there was still water. It was so wet that we were still there was still water available.
Okay.
So we said, does anybody, want additional water? And so several of those contractors are able to take additional water. For instance, like Kern can put it in the
Store it,
ground,
yeah,
or they
okay.
have storage reservoirs that they can put it in for later beyond what their table A allotment is, so they can take additional water in those years.
Okay, thank you for that clarification. All right, Bob.
In terms of the planning and modeling for the future, does it account for this other, I'm sorry, thank you. Does it account for the development of other water supplies, like for example, in Southern California or along the coast, where you deliver a lot of water there, and yet they have their own initiatives in terms of desalinization, conservation, just a whole variety of things they might do to cut their dependence upon the Delta. Is that in any way factored into modeling for the future, to look at these other kind of outside sources that may come online in the next couple of decades?
So we fully expect, that state water project contractors will continue to invest in recycling, conservation, reuse, potentially desalinization. But again, we assume 100% demand for the water that we would supply. And it's probably a pretty good assumption, is because those water supplies are still relatively expensive compared to state water project water.
Okay, and what about the Colorado River? That contract and what's going on there, does that come into play?
I mean,
in any of
again,
this?
it maybe only makes SWP water more higher demand,
Right.
because we know that cuts are coming on the Colorado as well.
Yeah.
So those contractors that have both supplies are looking at both and balancing where they're going to make.
Yeah, I imagine that puts a lot of pressure on you to find some new source or additional sources here too.
Yeah.
Okay, all right, thanks.
And my comment was really more of a comment on a comment. But this exchange, Kenny, that you just said, I think that's a perfect example of the kind of topic that we can tackle in this climate symposium that we were discussing earlier today, right? So how does one design scenarios for the future where you can't just take climate model projections and downscale them, expect that to be realistic, but this constant sort of rescaling of the last 100 years is also problematic. So I think this is a perfect example of where there is a need for new science and really thinking through what are the best ways to do it, given the uncertainties that we have today.
And my comment builds directly on that. So, don't want to get into the workshop we're about to have yet, but you did allude to this idea of adaptive management, maybe even a dynamic adaptive management within your constraints, because you have long planning periods. But, I see a lot of emphasis on better projections, better forecasts, but of course we all know we're never going to get the forecast perfect. We're not going to be able to prevent all shortages in the future, right? So do you have some other data wishes or science wishes that would inform the adaptation pathways or changes in management?
I mean, one of the things that I think we don't understand well enough is, so I think we have a fairly decent understanding of the thermodynamic impacts of climate change on precipitation in California, right? It gets warmer, Clausius-Clapeyron scaling goes up. We might see super Clausius-Clapeyron and certain types of storms and that kind of thing. I think we have the tools to understand that pretty well. What I think we're still struggling with, and that science could really help with, is like, what is the dynamical shift of these weather patterns and weather regimes? How are those likely to change? Are we likely to see more ridging patterns that set up and block the storms from coming into California over, a month or two of our winter season that cause droughts? Or are we likely to see the parade of atmospheric rivers that we saw in 2023? Are those more likely in the future, less likely? Does a jet stream go north, south? Those dynamical shifts in the atmosphere, I think we have much less confidence in what's going to happen and how that's going to affect the hydroclimate in California. So that's one of the areas where I think science could really help us. And, that would really help building into those scenarios in terms of, multi-year droughts and the probability of seeing those in the future.
Yeah, just one comment on this last conversation, assuming CC increase because of the moisture under warmer, in a warmer environment, for daily and higher, it's not sure. It might not be CC rate. It might be even, percent rate. So assuming that extra water is coming in the future because of warming, might require some sensitivity analysis to see maybe the water that you expect due to warming might not be there. For sub-daily, CC or super CC might be more palatable. But my comment is on this issue of use historical data, which we raised in the EIR report quite a lot. And I think that's a major limitations. I'm happy to hear that you're working on methods. And I feel like climate models simulations, whether it's downscaled, scenarios, can still be useful to identify drought durations and intensities. So I was wondering, is there any opportunity for us to see those methods even before our climate symposium that you say are being developed? Or is that more like a longer term effort to look at this? It bothered us a lot that the historical hydrology is being modified without paying attention to the drought frequency and durations in our EIR review. So I was wondering what's the timing of those explorations to look at climate model outputs as a way to run the models, even bias corrected perhaps?
So what we would likely do is that we would use our stochastic weather generator to generate, and in fact, we've already generated 1,000 years of meteorology with various different climate forcings applied to them. The trick is to get those inputs to to go from meteorology to hydrology to inputs to calcium. It's that gap. So you should, and you're more than welcome to take a look at the stochastic weather generator that we've developed, and I guess all of the data there is posted online on data.gov for different scenarios and different climate warming. And I think that's where we would start for a stochastic weather generation of a non-historically based climate. The forcings are based on the ensemble and on the downscaled climate. We just, they're so heterogeneous across all of the different climate models. So which climate model to use, which downscaling method, and as Dr. Rose was saying, you shouldn't base it on the historical, but then what should you base it on? Gets very complicated. And so we think this stochastic weather generator provides a really useful tool because it allows us to hold everything else stationary and control temperature and precipitation. And that allows us to really understand what is driving system change. Climate models, there's a lot of different things changing in a simulation. And so it's very difficult to understand what exactly is driving what change and what should we trust about it, and what maybe should we be concerned about.
Yeah, in Florida, we still look at climate models, and we try to pick a range of scenarios in the ensemble that would give different outcomes. So I think there is possibility of, but the concern I have with the weather generator, not having looked at it, it's an interesting approach, but simulating multivariate weather in a large scale system like this could be quite challenging. And I'm not sure if does it have the physics that regional climate models would have. I don't know, the dynamical effects, for example. I assume weather generator has that kind of reality in terms of physics of how the weather is there.
It does. It's based on, weather regimes. I'm not an expert on all of the internal but it is able to simulate historical dry periods and wet periods at the right frequency. And it has, it is based off of these important weather regimes for California, and it's spatially
that's great to hear. I think
temporally
I think that is good news. I think if you have a way to generate, I thought would be the hard part, because translating that into a weak model or some rainfall runoff model should be a little bit easier.
That's easy. Yeah, getting it into the rainfall runoff model is fairly easy. It's then the step to get it into calcium, which is still.
I think Virginia has a very urgent comment.
Well, to follow on, because I think you're right. It'd be interesting to know how the extremes of those GCM's models downscaled relate to what you have to have that information.
Yeah, we have done some comparisons between the weather generator and the Lookout ensemble, and that's in the report.
Is there a report on the weather generator?
Yeah, I can.
That would be great.
Send that.
That sounds very
Send it out
exciting
to you guys. Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
We're already over time, so we have two more comments / questions. Oh, you're done?
Oh, okay, I'm next. Okay.
Bob, okay.
I have a question about erosion, actually. The reservoirs, the storage reservoirs certainly have they have a certain capacity and they have a certain lifespan. And with changing land use and fires and so forth, I was curious as to the sediment trapping capabilities, in the reservoirs, what the real lifespans of them might be, and if the loss of that reservoir capacity for storing water is significant enough that it would be or should it be included in your models, especially where you're running them, 2, 3, 4 decades out? Do you think you'd be losing a lot of storage capacity?
So for Oroville, we in fact just did a brand new LiDAR study of the capacity of that reservoir last year. And so that's a 60-year-old reservoir. The new information caused us to adjust the storage curve by about loss of about 100,000 acre feet from that. But it's not entirely clear because the technology has improved so much since 1960. It's not entirely clear that the original bathymetry of that reservoir was all that accurate. So it's not clear how much of that 100,000 is really sedimentation and how much of it is just improved bathymetry. But we do monitor sediment inflow into the reservoirs. We've been monitoring that significantly post, we had major fires in the Feather River watershed in 2018, 19, 20, and 21. Over half of the watershed burned in those 4 years. And so we have a robust effort to monitor inflows and not just sediment, but large woody debris coming in. And a lot of the sediment seems to be being trapped further upstream. We have not seen a major influx of sediment even after those major fires in the watershed.
I just wondered, a lot of the reservoirs I'm familiar with, they seem to have a lifespan of maybe a century, let's say. And yet a lot of the reservoirs here are getting along in age. And where you're modeling so far in the future, I wonder if that must be have some significance on the output from your models is the loss of capacity over time.
Yeah.
Can I ask a super quick follow-up? What percent of the total capacity does that represent, that delta that you just mentioned?
So
20%, about 20% or no?
no, it's 3.5 million acre feet, right? Was the original capacity.
Okay,
So it's 3.4, yeah.
So not like much less than 1%.
Yeah.
Oh,
No, 5%, 3%.
Reservoirs can be dredged. Here it might actually worth it. The water supply.
What do you do with the sediment, right?
Yeah, that's the expensive part. Building it as
All right. All right. I don't want to cut you off. If Dr. Schwarz has more time, we can go on.
No, this has been very useful. Thank you.
Yeah. Very helpful. Well, he's only
I
last
thought coming in
because-
right after lunch, nice warm room. I thought everybody'd be asleep by the time I got done talking.
Not us. So we're all very grateful. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you. It's a
And,
pleasure.
And we'll be in touch with you about the climate symposium.
Yes, I have to ask about public comments. And
Hello, it's Deirdre Desjardins, and I wanted to say hi to Andrew, and I always appreciate the work you're doing. I did want to ask a somewhat technical question. So when you looked at the historic hydrology, you looked for runoff trends and you used the 30-year runoff, 30-year rolling average of runoff, and you didn't find any clear trends. I was wondering, I did look for a trend using instead Lois locally weighted scatter plot smoothing, and did find a trend. And I was wondering if you like considered looking for, more closely or continuing that analysis, particularly in light of the kind of temperature increases that we're seeing.
So I'd just say we didn't find a long-term trend in average annual runoff. We did find significant trends in various seasonal and monthly metrics, and we've adjusted for that. And we will continue to evaluate this, and moving forward, I think the plan is to at least every 5 years, if not every 2 years when the delivery capability report is updated, to take a look at that historical hydrology and reevaluate it with whatever new data is available. Yeah, we fully understand that that's a moving target, just like future climate projections, and we need to continue to update that and include newer data.
Did you do the 30-year rolling average just for smoothing, or because it's going to be slower to show a change if you use the 30-year rolling average?
We did so many different analyses. I don't know off the top of my head. I think we did. I'm fairly certain we did. But I'd have to go back and look.
Thanks.
Thank you.
All right. All right, do we have any public comments that are not on the agenda?
No public Deirdre, you're Dan. Deirdre, you can unmute your microphone. Thank you.
Yeah, I did just want to tell everybody, I don't know if you're aware, but there's been a huge outbreak of H5N1 bird flu in dairy herds in California. And it was over 461 dairy herds that are infected. And it's also in sewer sheds in California. A lot of, the different wastewater monitorings are showing spikes. And I've also been seeing it in raw milk. They recalled some raw milk. And Peter Hotez, I've been working with him some, he's infectious disease expert, and he thinks we could potentially see an epidemic outbreak if every time it gets into human beings, it's a chance that it'll recombine with a human virus and develop human-to-human transmission. So people are concerned because there's such a large reservoir in California, and there's and in dairy herds across the country, and that there's the more people it infects, the more risk there is of it developing human-to-human transmission. So that could happen as soon as 6 months to a year. It could, we could just escape the whole issue, but it's starting to be a major concern. And I'm not sure how it intersects exactly with what's happening here, but it will definitely affect human systems. In dairy herds, it's about 2 per 4%. It's much more lethal than COVID. It's about 2 to 4% of the entire herd dies, and there's about 20 to 30% morbidity. So, and there's a lot of concern about the Trump appointees, the new administration for HHS positions. So it's something I'm tracking closely because I live here, but I thought I'd want to put it on your radar screen. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Deirdre. I think we can now thank you again, Dr. Schwarz. And we have just one little thing to go, but you're free to go, of course. And yeah,
Thank you.
much appreciated. Thank you very much. Yeah. So we only have one agenda point left, which is the preparation for upcoming Delta ISB meetings. We'll have an online meeting in January, on January 29th. We'll have the council chair and the executive officer report. We'll discuss current ongoing reviews, and we'll have a presentation by California Department of Fish and Wildlife on the response to the golden mussel invasion. So that should be interesting. So I'll hand over to Edmund now for a review of the items to follow up.
Yep, and there were no public comments on preparation for upcoming meetings. In terms of items for follow-up, today during the Lookout Slough debrief, there was during the Lookout Slough debrief, there was interest in getting future updates on that specific project. For the climate science research symposium, the board took action to have Obey and Anna revise the prospectus based off the discussion today. There was interest to potentially have some sort of briefing paper or recommended readings to support the workshop. So that will be something that the leads will consider. And if ISB members have any recommended speakers, feel free to send them to staff and we'll get those compiled. In terms of Delta Adapts, the board agreed to conduct a full review of the document, and we had a breakdown of assignments, and I'll send those over by email as well. And then the idea is that individual ISB members will submit written comments by the first week of January. We did not finalize a date yet, so maybe January 1st. Happy New Year, but we'll see. that was a joke. That was a joke.
Cruel.
Yes. Yeah, the 6th. Okay, sorry. That was meant to be a funny joke, not a worrisome joke. And then the goal is to have some sort of draft comment letter potentially to discuss at the end of January meeting. Today, the board also discussed ideas for future expertise to recruit for. As mentioned at the meeting, Dr. Tom Holzer has resigned, and then Virginia Dale will likely not seek a second term. So Lisamarie will definitely be listening to this discussion today to help inform what expertise to recruit for. But I think based off the discussion, there's interest to have interdisciplinary scientists and likely to fill a geologist and landscape ecologist with some of the other expertise we talked about today, like traditional ecological knowledge, more hydrology, hydraulics, and other topical areas. So more to come on that. And then today, the board also took action on the comment letter for the council's tribal and environmental justice issues paper, and then we'll submit that to the council after the small edit has been made, which was to address Kenny's comment of changing overarching concerns to comments. So that's all I have for follow-up items. If there's anything to add or change, let me know.
I just want to add one thing. I was asked if I could share this. I generated summary and I've just gotten it and I can share it. It was on food security. And so actually what I'd seen was the first page, but there are 4 pages of bulletin things and then some summary of key papers. So it's about 8 or 10 pages with everything, but I'll send it to Edmund so you can kind of see what this AI summary did for this group looking at food security.
Great, thank you.
I sent Edmund the link to the conceptual models that were developed through a program called Debrief. As just as examples
Yeah. Thank you. So no more public comments?
Yep,
And-
none for this agenda item.
Okay, in that case, I adjourn the meeting and thank you all for being here.